This scoundrel reincarnated as a mere civilian who was employed by a noble house. No one knows, and because of that, they humiliated him. But in truth, he is a great swordmaster of his time, and now he will spare no one. He trained fencing for more than 70 years, and now that he has reincarnated in an era of peace, everyone is ridiculously weak compared to him. So weak that he humiliated a high-ranking imperial guard of the noble house right in front of his master. He put the guy to sleep without him even being sleepy. The adoptive father and master of the entire castle does not even know what to say upon seeing this. Before, he was completely humiliated and was rude to people. Now he even trains his hot adoptive sister. That is because he has a lot of experience with hot sisters, I mean, with swords. He trains well in a rigorous way, even hits her. The guy has become a Sigma Chad, and she is liking it. When he was young, he helped heroes become heroes, other sword masters, archmages, martial artists. He achieved all the fame in the world, but it was not for him. He himself considered himself unworthy and remained in the darkness. This was because he never had talent for the sword, only love for it. But at the end of his life, he ended up becoming a true master swordsman. But it was already too late for him, at least in that life. Now he has reincarnated. He is many years younger. He has no idea who the owner of this body was nor where he is, but as he walks through the castle he recognizes the place and thinks it is one of the territories where he served in his last life. Anyway, he needs to find out whose body he's in, and when he looks to the side he's surprised. There was a girl there beside him training with her sword. Our hero wonders if that was the Lord's daughter, because he doesn't remember seeing a child like her in his previous life. However, her sword technique is similar to that hero's. To be honest, she seemed quite talented. At the same time, the girl notices our hero staring, calling him Asher. She asks what he's doing standing there while the others are training. Then the boy asks if that is Rapenia's sword technique, because judging by it, she must have trained constantly for at least 4 or 5 years. However, her movement is still a little unstable, telling her to relax and try to slow it down a bit. Right away, the girl throws the sword at the poor guy's head, asking why he's talking so casually and whether he shouldn't show some respect to his master and call her Lady Reika. Next, Asher apologizes, thinking he had thought that girl was his sister. Right after that, Reika asks why someone who has never even held a sword is suddenly there, and also wants to know how he knows about the hero's sword technique. If you don't do it right, you're going to regret it. Then Asher thinks he can't believe he had the nerve to try teaching the lady of that castle. Then he heads toward the dummy, raising his sword, and meanwhile the girl was just watching, asking if that isn't the stance of the imperial sword technique, wanting to know when he started learning it, since it seems very different today. Asher stays silent, thinking that he's been doing this for over 70 years, and the moment he strikes at the same time, a huge explosion happens. The guy keeps thinking without stopping that having a young body is really very interesting. After all, it seems like you can do anything with a body like this, right? Right after that, the guy shatters the dummy into millions of pieces, and the girl meanwhile was just watching. The protagonist thinks he can't control himself when he's holding a sword, and then right after that he apologizes to Reika, who says it's no problem since that is the sword technique developed in the Empire. She was still very skeptical, asking how such a common sword technique could possibly reach that level of speed and destructive power. Out of nowhere she greets our boy, saying he's amazing, and only now had she realized that he has talent like that, asking why he had hidden that ability all this time. To be honest, she thought he was a useless, lazy person, but she was very mistaken. Wow, so it was at this level? Asher gets all embarrassed, and at that very moment, another man appears asking what she was doing with that guy. Just by looking at this dude, you can already tell he's no good. And then he says that since the protagonist is awake, he should go outside and chop firewood, asking how he dares speak to his family so shamelessly like that. He has to remember that he is just a commoner while they are nobles. And meanwhile, Asher thinks that guy is really very rude. Looking at the protagonist's hand, the guy notices that he was holding Reika's sword. But anyway, this is the perfect moment. After all, he needed a sparring partner. Drawing his sword, he says that if he lasts 1 minute, he'll acknowledge his skill. At once, his sister asks him to stop, and then the man says that obviously he wasn't going to kill him. However, Reika says that's not the issue, and to be honest, she doesn't think he would be able to do that. Meanwhile, Asher was just watching, thinking that that guy's stance is completely wrong, wondering how a girl like Laika could have such an idiot of an older brother. At once, the two get ready, and then the fight finally begins. At the same time, a sword flies through the air, and the victory after just a few seconds is given, obviously to the protagonist, but unbelievably he didn't want to win, thinking that losing on purpose is harder than he thought. At that very moment, a little ketchup starts coming out of the man's face, and he instantly gets furious. Then things just went downhill. My friend, I want to see how the MC is going to get out of this. The scene then shifts to another part of the castle, with that guy saying Asher should be severely punished, mentioning that a servant employed by the castle dared to injure the master. Besides that, they can no longer tolerate his actions, which dishonor the dignity of the nobility. The old man calls for the MC and asks if what Luke said was true, and Asher seems to know that old man, wondering if he had become a lord. 40 years ago, when he had just been appointed captain of the guard, he remembers visiting the guard with the former lord, and that guy there was much younger. So right then, our boy assumes that at least 20 years have passed since he died. Then Leverok says they had treated Asher like a son all this time, but this time he lost sight of his actions. Anyway, he deserves punishment, but considering the affection they had for him, they will be more reasonable, asking him to leave the territory immediately, but the other woman says to do anything except that. However, Leverok had a short fuse, saying that he had only tolerated Asher because of her, but this time he can no longer forgive him. After all, they cannot keep showing affection to an ungrateful child who does not recognize the grace of being raised. Anyway, he should be grateful he's being expelled without any injuries. And right after that, Reika appears saying that it was her brother who was wrong. He injured himself with his own sword while charging at Asher, and Asher was only teaching him how to use a sword. And to be honest, her brother's terrible swordsmanship is the real disgrace to the nobility that really tore the guy apart. At that, of course, Leverok is surprised, asking if Asher was really teaching her swordsmanship. The girl says that Asher possesses a high level of skill that made her want to have him as her mentor, and besides that, he has changed to the point of committing himself to her training. Her brother, hearing that, is of course surprised, asking if she really wants to learn that guy's useless style. Then she says that she witnessed the boy's sword skills with her own eyes, and if they don't believe her, they should ask him to demonstrate his abilities directly. The crown simply watches everything in silence. Then he calls for the guard, asking him to test Asher's skill with a sword. His wife says that's a bit excessive, but Leverok tells her not to worry, since this is just a simple evaluation, right? Yeah, I can already tell this won't end well. Meanwhile, the old man thinks he has no idea what trick Asher used to start practicing swordsmanship, much less to bewitch Reika. But if this is some kind of joke, he's going to regret it and will definitely be killed. The two prepare for battle, and Karen thinks that this idiot actually dared to try teaching Reika. On top of that, even in front of Lady Benicia, he won't hold back, charging straight at the MC. Reika was watching everything from afar, thinking that if what she saw was right, Asher can definitely hold his own against Karen. Then the guard notices that Asher was trembling, asking if he thought using a sword would be that easy. Anyway, since they're already here, he'll teach him a lesson. Then the exchange keeps going full force, and Karen thinks that Asher hadn't even mastered the basics and was still talking about being a swordsman. Just as he imagined, he's weak and extremely arrogant, wondering to himself how he dared try to stain the great art of the sword. Asher keeps doing nothing but defending. Then Leverok says he thinks that was too much for the protagonist. Reika also wasn't understanding anything. Then Luke says this is only to be expected from the Imperial Academy's top graduate, and there's no way Asher can face him. Our boy keeps smiling, and Karen thinks that Brad is pathetic, telling him to remember the difference between the two of them. At the same time, Asher says he put on a fairly interesting performance, and now he'll return the favor. Then our MC raises his sword, and with a single burst sends Karen flying. Everyone is left shocked by what they saw, and the guard was trying to understand what that was. Well, my friend, now the tables have turned, and Asher, mocking the guard, says he didn't even land it properly, and yet he still went down. However, in his head, our boy wonders why this generation is so weak, assuming it's because they were living in an era of peace. Anyway, he'll have to fix all of this by teaching military discipline. He keeps looking down at Karen, saying that he is the leader of the Templars in Arok territory, asking if he's really going to fall at the hands of a mere commoner. Then the guy, furious, charges straight at the protagonist. He tries to land a blow, but our boy dodges easily, and then punches the poor guy in the face. Everyone was watching what was happening, because the protagonist literally smashed the guard's face in. Karen couldn't stay on his feet any longer, and Asher thinks it's disgraceful. If this were back then, not only a commander like him, but even any ordinary soldier was incomparably better. Even so, countless soldiers died against the demons, unable to do anything. This time is supposed to be an era of peace, but even so, they shouldn't allow themselves to become this soft. Right after that, a bunch of soldiers rush at Asher, and Benessia asks her husband to stop this already. Then he asks the protagonist who he really is. Damn, now everything's really falling apart. After all, he isn't the Asher they know. Our boy stays silent for a few seconds, but comes up with an excuse, saying he lost his memory. Yeah, much better than saying he reincarnated. This morning when he woke up, he couldn't remember anything. To be honest, he doesn't know who he is, much less who they are, and all he has left is the memory of his skill with the sword. At first he thought using the sword would help him recover his memories, but he still feels that emptiness in his chest. But anyway, it's clear that he had harmed the chief, and kneeling down, our boy says he accepts any kind of punishment. Everyone falls silent, and a little later inside a room, Asher thinks he needs time to get himself organized. That's why, until everything is settled, he won't leave his room. He stares at his sword. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Reika thinks Asher had changed a lot, and it's as if he had become a completely different person. Little does she know, right? Until yesterday, that boy wasn't like this. After all, he had never held a sword, and his behavior was vulgar. He is his mother's adopted son, and before she and her brother were born, their mother found him abandoned outside the castle. Back then, their mother was depressed because she had no children, so she personally took care of the protagonist. And so, ever since the two of them were born, Asher has been family, but their relationship grew worse and worse over time. Her mother always showered Asher with love and obsession, and it even seemed like she favored him in some way. Even with all her efforts, Asher drifted away, and his behavior caused chaos on the estate. In fact, he was about to be kicked out of the castle, but because of his mother, he was allowed to stay on the condition that he work as a servant. Yeah, the guy who used to be in the MC's body was trash. He definitely was a complete idiot. But then, out of nowhere, he suddenly changed. From the way he speaks to his behavior, basically his whole personality changed completely. Besides the fact that he's acting like a master swordsman who trained for years to reach that level. Soon after, Reika knocks on the protagonist's door saying she brought him some food. She opens the door, and man, the protagonist had his sword raised. He didn't look friendly at all. Then my guy, all you can see is the food falling to the floor. Nothing good is coming from this. The poor girl was trembling in fear on the floor, and Asher, seeing that it was Reika, apologizes. He had seen a sword in the room and thought he'd practice a little. Yeah, and almost killed the girl. The two of them stay silent there, and a little later, Reika was watching the MC train a bit. He really is obsessed with the art of the sword, and then Asher calls out to her, asking what kind of person he was before he lost his memory. After all, anyone he sees in that place doesn't seem to have a very good relationship with him, and hearing that, Reika says he was very different. Except for his mother, his family, and even the people in the castle don't like him. Resorting to violence or destroying property were some of the things he did in the past, and hearing that, Asher thinks this body really went too far. Soon after, he asks why Reika is speaking normally with him, if she wasn't at least supposed to despise him too. However, Reika asks why she would do that after all. The way he is now is much better, asking him to take care of her. Whoa, what kind of idea is that? The boy keeps not saying a single word, and soon after, someone knocks on the door asking if they can come in. It was Benicia, and Asher thinks that she is Leverok's wife. Our boy then kneels, asking what he could do for her. But Benicia just takes the boy's face in her hands, saying he doesn't need to treat her like that. Regardless of what happened, she was the one who raised him, asking him to treat her as he always did. At that, Asher says that the Asher she knew is no longer here. But even so, she looks at him with great affection, even though to him she is a complete stranger. At the same time, Benicia hugs the MC, saying she was the one who found him first. When she reached 20 years old, she still didn't have an heir, and then she ended up finding him abandoned outside the castle. When she took him in her arms and saw the boy smile, her world changed. And despite the opposition of others, she raised him with love and care. Even if he sees her as a stranger, that's okay, since she raised and loved him as her own son. Meanwhile, Asher wonders if he can really start over by becoming someone else, thinking that these people meant nothing to his past self. A little later, in Leverok's hall, he was assuming that the MC might be a demon, but it must just be a stupid concern. That race disappeared a long time ago, and even if one existed, it has no connection to Asher. After all, he would probably infiltrate the nobles to gain more power, and there's no reason to stay in the body of a commoner. However, for a child like that to defeat a high-level knight like Karen is another matter. To make matters worse, his daughter also wanted to become his student, and soon after someone says they're having an interesting conversation. Some fully hooded guy was sitting on the window, and then the guards rush at him asking who he is. At the same time, the guy easily blocks the attack, saying he's actually not bad with a sword, mentioning that Leverok has decent soldiers. Right then, the hooded man throws the poor guy, saying that if he were a little younger, he would have managed to fight. Nobody understood what was happening, and at that very moment, Karen seems to recognize who the man was. Leverok says that 20 years have already passed, welcoming him to his home. The one who reached the title of Swordmaster called Esther Hybon. Man, isn't that the guy the MC was friends with in the past? A little later, Leverok asks where His Majesty has been. He disappeared suddenly 20 years ago, and he even thought he was dead. Then the guy says there was something he needed to investigate. He traveled to the ends of the world, and man, he didn't seem to have found anything good there. But even so, he still hadn't discovered everything. Changing the subject, he asks if there was a boy who had defeated one of Leverok's knights, and the man answers yes. Besides that, he was a commoner who had never properly studied the art of the sword, and then Hyban says he must possess exceptional talent, asking him to tell him more about it. Meanwhile, the protagonist was telling Reika to attack him with all her strength. However, the girl asks why he still hasn't even drawn his sword, but Asher says this isn't about sword skill, it's real combat training, and it starts even before you draw your sword. Either way, you have to come at him with the intent to kill. Reika asked to be his disciple, and he refused because of their difference in status, but her determination was strong enough for her to keep insisting. At the same time, the girl charges at Asher, but he dodges every strike, thinking she certainly has talent and her skills are actually pretty good. But even so, she is still very weak, and her movements are very predictable. Reika falls to the ground, and then Asher extends his hand to help, saying that she is strong, but that only applies to the sword. Before swordsmanship, she has to train her mind and body. After all, real combat is completely different. Either way, she has to abandon this blind faith in sword fighting, because just possessing swordsmanship is not enough to survive in real combat. What she must learn now is how to control her emotions, because she can never lose her calm and composure in front of her opponent. The kid keeps giving instructions, and Reika just watches, thinking that his skill is impeccable. She immediately stands up, and then the training begins. A little later, the lesson had already ended, and the poor girl was completely exhausted. He never loses, and his stamina seems monstrous. But even so, she feels like she's getting stronger. Right then, her brother shows up, asking if she was messing around with that idiot, and Reika says it was training. Luke says that being with a man isn't training, and the girl says he can think whatever he wants. The two keep arguing, and Luke says she shouldn't be learning from someone like him. At that very moment, Reika draws her sword, telling him to just shut up already. The kid immediately trembles in fear, saying that if she hits him, it won't end well for her. At that same moment, another person appears, saying there's a sister trying to hit her brother. It was Hyban, saying that it really is a rare sight. Then Leverok goes up to his daughter, saying that not even she would get away with it if she did something. Right after that, the girl looks to the side, wanting to know who that old man is. After all, somehow, it feels like there's something extraordinary about him. Luke calls him a sword master, and Reika is obviously surprised right away. There are fewer than 10 of them in the entire empire, And then Luke says he has always admired his swordsmanship, asking to become his disciple, thinking that only a sword master could truly teach him. But my friend, little does he know that the MC was also a master. But the poor guy was simply ignored, and Haiban, talking to Reika, says it's a pleasure to meet her, thinking that this girl doesn't feel intimidated in front of him, and looks like she's ready to strike back at any moment, wondering if he should test her. At that very moment, Haiban grabs his sword, and everyone was just watching. Reika, meanwhile, hadn't moved a single muscle, wondering if this old man really is a sword master. At the same time, she remembers the protagonist's lessons saying that keeping your composure in front of any opponent is extremely important. Meanwhile, the guy was drawing his greatsword in front of her. But my friend, the girl was completely determined. Incredibly enough, she manages to block the strike, and Haiban is surprised too, right? Thinking that when he sees new talents, he usually approaches them aggressively to assess their reactions. But normally they run away in fear of his oppressive presence, or simply can't withstand even a light blow. Even so, this young woman stood her ground with a wooden sword, facing his strike, which means she definitely has the determination of a warrior. At that very moment, the two move apart, and the girl charges straight at Haiban. The man simply watches everything in silence, wondering if Reika is from some school called Ravania. He says she is truly impressive, counter-attacking with his sword. Reika finally falls to the ground, and the poor girl can't say a single word. Haiban points his sword at her, and then Leverok asks him to stop all this. But then the man says that unlike his cowardly son, he has a very brave daughter, and that completely crushed Luke. Reipan was about to say something else, but at that very moment, Reika gets up once again, and grabbing her sword, she tries to fight again. Wow, this girl really doesn't give up. At that same moment, the man appears behind the girl, saying that she even managed a counterattack while he was distracted, and that it's impressive. The poor girl didn't understand anything, and Haiban asks if she could take him to her master. Reika says yes, then thinks that guy is definitely not a normal person. A little later, Reika thinks she used all her strength, but he handled her attack as if it were nothing. Besides that, there's also the fact that even her father is being more cautious around that guy. Right after that, Raven asks her if her name is Reika, wanting to know what she felt when she saw that young man's swordsmanship. She answers that she felt like she was fighting a veteran, and the man laughs at her for calling a boy of only 18 that. Then a few minutes later, Raven says it's been a long time since he visited this training ground. He had once trained there with a great friend of his, and Leverok asks where that person is. He answers that, unfortunately, he is no longer alive, and my friend, it's definitely the MC. Meanwhile, the protagonist was training, and then someone calls out to him. It was Reika, and Asher at that very moment is surprised by who else was there too. After all, it was his old friend wondering why he was there. However, he remembers that Haiban had a connection with Leverok. When Leverok was young, he specifically asked Haiban to take care of him. Haiban is happy that the protagonist recognizes him, and with a smile, he immediately starts drawing his sword, and Asher thinks that he's going to see that habit once again. He was always testing new talents, and in any case, it's been quite a long time since the last time he did that. At that very moment, the protagonist draws his sword too, and incredibly enough, it leaves Haiban speechless, thinking that it is flawless swordsmanship. Right then, a flashback appears of him talking with the protagonist, who says that his skill is nothing compared to Haiban's. However, the man says they merely took different paths, suggesting a training match for old time's sake. The two start fighting and seem to share some kind of camaraderie. And returning to the present, Haiban seemed to see that same energy in the protagonist. Little did he know that this guy is the very same one. The guy was still hung up on all of this, and out of nowhere he calls Asher the captain of the guard. Everyone falls silent, and Leverok asks what he had just said, to which he replies that it was nothing. Then he calls out to Asher, asking if he happens to be that guy's disciple. But our boy says he doesn't know what he's talking about, since he doesn't have a master. Hearing that right away, the man takes the opportunity to ask if he wants to become his disciple. What is this? That fast? Leverok is also surprised that a master swordsman wants a disciple, and at that very moment, Reika asks him to wait, saying that even though he's a master swordsman, he still attacks people out of nowhere, asking what kind of behavior that is, and whether he can just go around swinging his sword at anyone, just because he's a master swordsman. Leverok tells his daughter to watch her words, but Haiban says it's fine, mentioning that young people these days don't know who he is. But either way, he'll show them now, and out of nowhere a giant tornado appears. No one understood what was happening, and Asher, watching the situation, thinks that this is the mark of a master swordsman. This is called aura, and at that very moment, Haiban swings his sword. The guy attacks a mountain, and at the same time, a huge explosion happens. We see that the mountain was literally blown away. Taking advantage of the opening, Haiban says that he is a master swordsman, mentioning that talented individuals like them are destined to reach great heights, asking Asher what he thought of that and whether he'll become his disciple. Meanwhile, Reika was just watching that immense power, wondering how powerful she would become if she were that guy's disciple. But soon after, Asher, unbelievably enough, turns down the offer. Everyone is left speechless by that, and a few minutes later, the whole city was happy that the master swordsman had come to their territory. Everyone wanted to see the master swordsman, but some guards were stopping them. Meanwhile, Asher kept training, saying that it's a mess outside the castle, and looking to the side, he asks Haiban if he isn't going there, who replies that he'll stay there for a while. asking if he really won't become his disciple, and Asher says he already said no, thinking that this guy is already glued to him wherever he goes so he can make him his disciple. Anyway, it's ridiculous to become your friend's student. At that, Asher points to Reika, saying it'd be more worthwhile to teach her, but the poor girl didn't seem very happy about that. Hyben says he had already asked her, but the girl refused, mentioning that she already has a master. Well, at least she's loyal. Hearing that, the protagonist is surprised, wondering if she turned down the offer to become a master swordsman's disciple. All that just so she could learn from him. After all, there was no need to go that far, right? A little later, night had already fallen, and Luke was walking through the city. The guy was pissed about what Hyben said, thinking that it's all because of that guy. He has to disappear, and because of him, his life is a complete mess. Man, blaming others really is much easier, huh? At that very moment, something lunges at him, and then my friend, the poor guy gets caught by it. The big monster just lets out a laugh, and a little later the scene shifts to Luke lying on the ground. Getting up, he wonders where he was, and right then someone calls his name. A fully hooded guy appears and says it's a pleasure to meet him. Man, that little guy doesn't look very friendly. Then a day passes, and Reika, mad as hell, says she can't stand that old man, asking whether he shouldn't show more respect, mentioning that Asher isn't intimidated by him either, who thinks it's because he's his friend. And besides that, he had also reached the level of a master swordsman, and then says it wouldn't hurt for her to learn from Hyben, but Reika says she wants to be like him. After all, he's the person she hopes to become one day, and she genuinely acknowledges him as her master. Wow, that was beautifully said just now. So he has to stop putting himself down like that. And then Asher thinks that he has no talent for swordsmanship. All the swordsmanship in this world was created by the heroes of the past, and all swordsmen want to learn heroic swordsmanship and surpass their human limits. However, he was different, because imperial swordsmanship is a basic and simple style that anyone can learn, created and distributed by the empire. It was the only art that someone talentless like him could learn, and so he lived his whole life holding a sword using only that so-called imperial swordsmanship. But even so, he wanted to know why someone as talented as Reika respected him so much. But in her mind, the girl thinks that Asher had made her much stronger. Before, she wouldn't have been able to withstand that old man's pressure, and his lessons helped her significantly, thinking that he is basically her light. Hold on, my friend, that's a bit much. Right then, Hyben appears asking if it's a lover's quarrel. Well, look at that, the old man with the bad jokes. The protagonist asks him not to be ridiculous, and looking at Hyben's hand asks what that was, who replies that it's just a gift for him. After all, since he doesn't focus on the form of weapons, he can use any kind of sword or equipment. Asher says that's true, thinking that imperial swordsmanship serves to build a foundation. All of that unlike heroic swordsmanship, which is built on superhuman techniques. However, the advantage of imperial swordsmanship is that heroic swordsmanship only applies to swords, while his works with any kind of weapon. Returning to the present, Asher realizes he had received iron gloves. Hyben says it's not just a gauntlet, because there's something much more interesting about it, asking him to put strength into his arm and imagine any weapon. Asher does what he asked, and man, a dagger appears instantly. Hyben says this is extremely useful, and Asher asks if this is magic by any chance, who replies that this is spatial magic for storing weapons, and to put something inside, you just have to imagine yourself doing it. Keep in mind that only weapons can be stored, and Asher says it would be useful for him, but useless for swordsmen who are too fixated on the form of their weapons, asking why he created this, and Hyben says he didn't make it for him. Actually, he had made one for that friend, even though he died before receiving it. Reika asks if it's that guy from 20 years ago he mentioned before, and Hyben says yes, because he also used imperial swordsmanship, and even though they followed different paths, honestly, he liked that guy a lot. He accepted his lack of talent, didn't give up, and simply followed his own path. Hearing that, Asher thinks he thought someone without talent would have no value at all to the heroes, but who would have thought he cared enough to make something like this? Right after that, Hyben tells Asher that he looks a lot like his friend, and that his behavior and even the way he talks are the same. His posture and swordsmanship are exactly the same too, and to be honest, he ended up feeling jealous, asking once again if he'll become his disciple. Hearing that, the protagonist smiles and then says he'll accept, but even so, it'll only be temporary. Anyway, they should duel now, and without wasting time, Hyben draws his sword as well. Now things are really about to get serious. Reika thinks Asher seems satisfied with the gift, and on top of that, he gained a master with an incredible reputation. The fight between the two keeps going, and then the scene shifts to that hooded man from before, saying there was a rumor that a sword master was in that place, so he came to take a look. Luke asks who he is, and he replies that he's from the Assassin Guild Motorola, and came to ask the Lord's son for permission to establish themselves there. Hearing that, Luke thinks he's heard that name before, because it's the biggest assassin guild that appeared 50 years ago. Wondering why they would be in a territory like this, but there must be a way for them to help each other in this situation, right? Saying that he allows them to stay, but on the condition that they accept his offer. Man, I can already tell this won't lead to anything good. At that, the guy smiles and then asks him to tell him more about it, and Luke, without hesitating, orders him to kill the protagonist. Look at that, I knew it, man. Hearing that, the assassin just laughs, and meanwhile the protagonist's fight was going on. Neither of them was willing to admit defeat, and Asher charges at Hyben, landing an attack. However, of course, it wouldn't be enough to affect the swordmaster, who thinks Asher's skill is comparable to his own, saying that his movements are close to perfection, and Asher says that's what he has to offer. At the same time, Hyban throws the protagonist, however the boy quickly regains his footing. And then the man says it's a shame that besides imperial swordsmanship, he doesn't seem to have talent for heroic swordsmanship. He stares at Asher, and right after that he grabs one of the daggers, saying that it seems he adapted to using tools, and Asher says that's why he needs to make good use of these tricks. With that, the days pass, and Asher continues training with Hyban, but of course he was still teaching Reika too. The boy says that woman has much more talent than he does, and Hyban says his personality is just like that guy's, just like him. He only learned imperial swordsmanship, and he was someone who only worried because he thought he had no talent. Even though he thought he had no talent, to be honest, now he doesn't even know what that would mean. At that very moment, Asher is surprised, unable to believe Hyban said that. Hyban is a man people believe was blessed with talent, and who would have thought that arrogant guy would change his values in just a few years, wondering what really could have happened. Right after that, Reika appears there, and she was pretty well dressed, huh? At that, she says they have a guest from the Empire, and Hyban apparently was already expecting them, calling them a troublesome little group. A little later, a bunch of soldiers were kneeling before Hyban, asking him to return to the capital. Hyban says he expected the captain of the guard's successor to show up, and then the other soldier says he's busy with other matters. At that, the man ends up accepting and says he was already planning to. Anyway, but in any case, they'll only go tomorrow since it's late today, right? With everything settled, Hyban says it was good to see Leverok again after so long. Besides that, it was a pleasure meeting Reika, and I'm sure you'll see each other again someday. All of this despite not knowing which path he will take. Hearing that, Reika is left speechless, and then a flashback appears, with the protagonist in his original body, training. Suddenly someone appears saying he has no talent, asking if it wouldn't be better to find another job, and Asher says he does this because he wants to. If he had planned to fall because of a lack of talent, he would have given up long ago, so she just needs to stop watching and leave already. That girl there is named Lefania, who then says she has some advice for him, mentioning that he won't achieve anything and that his talent is pathetic to that extent. Seriously, why go that far? He will return to the land as a third-rate swordsman, and at best that would be his future. At that very moment, the protagonist wakes up realizing it was just a dream. But even so, it was a dream from his past life, and he feels disgusted just thinking about it. Lefania is the youngest swordmaster to ever exist, and she said he would never achieve anything. However, he became a master swordsman at the end of his life, and was even teaching a girl who has the potential to become his successor, thinking that she was definitely wrong. And at that very moment, Hyban appears asking if he's training at this hour. He replies that he had a nightmare and couldn't sleep, and then Hyban says he's awake because he's leaving for the Empire at dawn. They won't see each other for a while, so they should make the most of the moment. Out of nowhere, Hyban changes his expression, saying that he has been traveling the world for the last 20 years to find contradictions and see how the world has changed. But after meeting him, he thinks he has discovered what he wanted. Right away, the protagonist is on alert, wondering what this bloodlust is about. Hyban draws his sword, striking in the protagonist's direction. However, the attack was not aimed at him, but behind him. Several monsters are defeated, and the MC was surprised by what had happened. Then Hyban says that this is the truth he discovered, after traveling for 20 years. To make it easier to understand, those things are demons. They have been relentlessly pursuing him, lying in wait since before, and Asher asks why they are there. These creatures were supposed to have been banished from the world by the heroes, and Hyban says yes, and the heroes certainly defeated the Demon King. Because of that, all creatures of darkness such as demons and monsters disappeared, and that is the truth known by the world. However, all of that is a complete lie, and those things are still pursuing him. They are probably trying to eliminate him to keep the truth hidden. And Asher says, for now, let's deal with these guys. After all, that's the priority, right? The demons charge at the protagonist, but of course, a monster like that wasn't going to do anything to him. The kid even uses his glove, changing his sword into a spear, using it to wipe out all the demons at once. Meanwhile, Hyban watches everything from afar, thinking that that movement is just as the girl had said. After all, it seems to be the skill of a true veteran. And to be honest, it was as if he were seeing his friend, and this boy is definitely not ordinary, which means he definitely has talent. And so, time passes, and the two had finally finished off all the demons. Then Hyban says he had suspected that Asher might also be one of them. He thought he might be a demon imitating a child's appearance after consuming Jinwoo's memories, and hearing that, Asher asks if he was referring to a mimic. He replies that that's exactly it, but demons cannot copy the swordsmanship of a human who has reached that level, and he is definitely a human who reminds him of his late friend. In any case, he is going to the Empire to reveal the truth and warn them of the imminent danger, and after that, he needs to look for the missing hero. Even so, he hoped they could meet again someday. And next time, he definitely wants to have a long conversation with him. Then time passes, and Asher was just chilling, lying on his bed, wondering if that guy had really failed to defeat the Demon King. When the world was burning because of the Demon King's arrival, he appeared like a comet that drove everything back. He was extremely powerful, as if he were a hero straight out of a fairy tale. But just like Hyban, he disappeared 20 years ago, abandoning the lands and the people he ruled, wondering where the hero could have gone. If he failed to defeat the Demon King, there's no way to explain the peace the world has enjoyed all this time. But regardless of what is happening, his duty remains the same. Whether he wants to uncover the truth or not, he will still continue to wield his sword. Man, even now I want to know whether he can use the abilities of a swordmaster or not. At that very moment, Luke calls out to the protagonist, and man, I'll be honest, that guy was definitely plotting something. A little later, somewhere, a hooded figure asks if the leaders really need to accompany him, and the man says that guy is a disciple of the master swordsman. The hooded figure says he's just a boy, and to make matters worse, he only knows imperial swordsmanship, but the bearded man says that young man is dangerous because he is different, asking him to remember when their organization revealed itself to the world, because the one who brought it to the brink of destruction was also someone who learned imperial swordsmanship. But then the guy says it was because your organization was weak, but now it's very different. Not to mention that he'll definitely fall by your hands, mentioning that, as the one who carries the hero's legacy, he won't be defeated by something as inferior as imperial swordsmanship. Hearing that, the little bearded guy falls silent, and then the scene shifts once again to another place. The protagonist was looking at a paper Luke had handed him, asking to meet in that alley. Our boy definitely knows things are going to get ugly there, but he's still going along with it, right? And upon entering the place, he asks why they simply didn't show up. At that very moment, something appears in front of him, and then those hooded figures from before show up. Asher realizes it was Motorola's guild, and asks what business they have with someone as inferior as him. The hooded one beside him is surprised, asking how this brat knew who his group was. The other one immediately confronts Asher, asking if the swordmaster told him about them. But Asher says he already knows enough, thinking that he had faced them in his past life, and back then they had also established themselves in this territory. Basically, he had found them and completely destroyed them. Man, why so much ignorance? Back in the present, that hooded figure says he only came there to dig his own grave. But our boy just gives a smile, and then right away, he draws his sword. The kid took one of them out in a matter of seconds, saying that just like before, they keep yapping even after being mercilessly annihilated by imperial swordsmanship. The guy asks how he knows that, and Asher replies that it doesn't matter. All of that, since his goal is the only thing on his mind. Anyway, there's only one thing he needs to do, and a few minutes later, the scene shifts elsewhere, with a king saying it's been a long time since he's seen the Empire's child. The funny thing is him calling a bearded guy like Haiben a child, and Haiben replies that it's been over 20 years, and he seemed smart back then, but now he's just an old man carrying the weight of reality. The man says that as always, he shows no respect for the royal family, and the guy, all confident, says he follows the path of the sword, so human authority means nothing to him. Oops, my bad. There, the best thing since sliced bread. Right after that, the king mentions that he heard rumors that the rift was opened and demons appeared, asking what that means. Haiben says the priority is to find the hero, so he needs the Empire's cooperation, but the king says that will be difficult. Haiben is shocked to hear that, and the king says that isn't the only problem, because they're short on manpower. After all, the hero wasn't the only one who disappeared, and Haiben, not understanding anything, asks what he was talking about. Then the scene shifts back to the protagonist battle once again, and the hooded figure says that normally he would kill him now, but he changed his mind. Anyway, he'd better tell him right away how he knows about his past. Asher tells him to try his luck, and right then, one of the hooded figures charges at him. But of course the kid isn't going to get caught off guard, right? Right away, a whole bunch of them rush at our boy, but he manages to dodge all of them, and incredibly enough, he counterattacks with immense ease. The guy over there was just watching from afar, saying that he's using some cheap tricks, asking if this is the desperate effort of a weak human. And meanwhile, Asher thinks that gauntlet is pretty useful, and it seems he didn't notice that he had used spatial magic to create his weapon. Right after that, the hooded figure says Asher will fall before his swordsmanship. At that moment, the protagonist realizes it was the swordsmanship of the Motorola Guild. Thinking that it's a skill that hides its form and travels through the darkness, striking vital points, the guy realizes that Asher already knew this technique, telling the swordmaster's disciple to die by the hands of this great swordsmanship. At that very moment, the guy launches his attack and Asher remained on the defensive. In the middle of that situation, he thinks it's strange because he can't predict any patterns in the attacks. The hooded figure, on the other hand, was completely convinced, and the guy wouldn't stop pressing the offensive. Asher seemed to be having some kind of difficulty, and then he ends up dropping his sword, saying that he seems to be quite talented since it's a difficult swordsmanship to learn, and the guy says he is one of the 13 seats recognized by the master of Motorola. Hearing that, Asher says that title is pathetic, asking why Motorola is after him, and the man questions since when assassins give explanations to their target. However, our quick-witted boy says that since he's going to die anyway, there's no problem granting his last wish. The guy ends up falling for it, saying they came there specifically to kill him. All of that had been decided by some so-called oracle. Changing the subject, he asks if that answer is satisfactory, and Asher says that's more than enough. And right then, man, the kid has now gone on the offensive. The weird-mouthed guy asks what that was, and our boy replies that it's just a cheap trick like he said, right? The scene then shifts somewhere else, and Luke is having a drink, saying that by now that guy must already be dead. The thorn in his side is finally gone, and no matter how skilled the protagonist was, those guys he hired are on another level. But at that very moment, someone says they finally found him. Oh man, Luke had already seen the shit that was about to happen because Asher was alive, and to make matters worse, inside his room, the kid was completely calm, saying he wanted to have a little chat. Luke wants to know why he is there, and Asher asks what he means by that. because it was as if he were saying he shouldn't be there. And right then, Luke wonders if that guy had really defeated the people from the Motorola Guild, which means he probably found out that it was Luke who set up the assassination. Next, the protagonist starts walking toward Luke, who tells him not to come any closer, asking how he dares enter a noble's chambers. But the kid didn't care about that at all, and had already drawn his sword. However, that was only a threat, saying that until now he had ignored his actions. However, this time he had gone too far. But he hopes he won't disturb his peace with such dishonorable acts. Once again, our kid is seriously pissed off. Asher lets go of his sword, and then he starts to leave, saying this is the last time he deals with him and hoping their paths won't cross again to avoid any trouble. However, if that happened one more time, this would be his last warning. Luke kept listening to all of that in silence, and man, that little buddy there didn't seem to be doing very well. A little later, the scene shifts to that guild from earlier, and a hooded man says there had been a failure. The bearded man says he had already expected that since they were defeated once again by Imperial swordsmanship, just like before. No matter how he thinks about it, he wants to know who that boy really is. At that very moment, someone appears there laughing, asking if he really thinks that boy has a connection to the former captain of the guard, all just because he used Imperial swordsmanship. Either way, he couldn't believe the infamous Motorola Guild failed to deal with a single child. The old man says his past experiences with Imperial swordsmanship were not pleasant, and the hooded man says they were simply outmatched because of his lack of skill. Either way, he will deal with the kid personally, with the great power of the god Marunia. A little later, in the city, a bunch of people were gathered. Apparently, an assassin had threatened young Master Luke and entered the village. Besides that, the rumors say the one who took down the bandits was that idiot Asher. Even so, they don't believe he became the Swordmaster's disciple, and there's no way a troublemaker like him could have changed in such a short time. A few minutes later, the scene shifts to Leverock's hall, and Karen says the entire village could have been destroyed. Leverock, furious, says Luke had caused a huge mess, asking where he was now. The guard says he still hasn't left his room, and Leverock says that's fine, because he needs to reflect on his actions. Anyway, he wants to know how the village is doing, and the guard states that things have calmed down and everything is gradually stabilizing. Besides that, it seems their opinion of the protagonist is getting better and better. At that, Leverock reflects that he should show his gratitude to Asher, but Karan says he wants to know Asher's true identity, asking whether someone's personality and strength can really change so drastically. And Leverock says Master Highband guaranteed that Asher is not a demon. However, he is still dangerous, because if he used his powers for evil, he would be capable of destroying Arak territory easily. Even so, he fought for them and ended up saving the village, and because of that, they need to make sure whether Asher is really on their side or if he has ulterior motives. Anyway, an opportunity to verify that has appeared. In short, they need to observe how Asher will react from now on. Karen asks what he was talking about, and then the scene shifts to the MC deep in thought. Suddenly a flashback appears with him telling the hooded man to tell the whole truth, asking why his god wanted him dead. The guy says they don't know the reason and only follow orders, because the oracle told them to kill him, and only act after gathering information that he was in that village. Asher says it seems they plan to use Luke to establish themselves there, and the man says that's exactly it, asking if he will spare him because he had told the whole truth. However, our boy had never said that, right? And then the scene shifts back to the present, the protagonist wondering what they could be plotting. Motorola is a cult that worships the god Marunia, and the leader who holds the position of honored seat receives great power from that god. They expanded their influence using that god's power, but he defeated them in the past, wondering why they had appeared again, even supposing that this god might know about his reincarnation. Anyway, he will have to go directly to the capital. After all, someone there might know something about the secret of his reincarnation. At that very moment, someone knocks on the door, and it was Reika. The girl didn't seem very happy, and then she says she received a proposal for an arranged marriage. What is this, all of a sudden? At the same time, a flashback appears with Reika saying she still isn't ready to get married, and her father says he understands how she feels. Even so, there is no other choice, because she knows who the person on the other side is. Still, she has to meet him first, and he might end up being a good person. Returning to the present, the girl says this is nothing more than being sold off to a prestigious family. Asher says they must be pretty powerful, and she replies that it's the Count of Belaturia. Our boy seems to recognize that place, wondering if they're really doing an arranged marriage like this. That guy is one of the ancient heroes and the current lord of Belaturia, named Valbarka Belaturia. They had some kind of connection in his past life, and he personally wasn't that powerful or well known, but he was a virtuous man who ruled his territory well. Asher asks if the lord proposed to her, and the girl says of course not, it was his son. The lord has more than 50 wives, and just thinking about marrying a guy like that gives her the creeps. Asher thinks Valbarka must be pretty old by now, but even so, he wants to know why his son would be involved in an arranged marriage. Suddenly, a flashback appears with someone saying that is his son. His name is Boros, and the protagonist says he has a brave son. Changing the subject, what happened is that marriage proposals have already started circulating among families and nobles, but Valbarka says he plans to have his son marry someone he loves, whether she's a commoner or not. Back in the present, Asher thinks Valbarka isn't a typical aristocrat, because he was very humble, and even someone like him succumbed to the reality of nobility. At that, Reika says she heard the rumors, asking if he dealt alone with the assassin organization that invaded the territory. She says she wants to be as strong as him, and the MC says she's very talented, so it's a shame to see her leave. At that very moment, she stares at Asher, mentioning that she has one last favor to ask. A little later, Asher was holding a sword, asking if they were really going to have one last duel. Rika says yes, because after this she won't be able to hold a sword anymore, but before that she wanted to have her final fight, asking him not to hold back. She charges at Asher, and then their final training begins. A little later, the fight was already over, and of course Asher won. Right after that, another person appears, and the one there was Benesia, the girl's mother. She takes her daughter's hand, and Rika asks why her mother looks sadder than she does. She also had an arranged marriage, so it's fine, but her mother says she already knew her father beforehand. But Rika hasn't met that person even once, and she says it shouldn't be a problem since he's from the family of heroes, and forming ties with them could be beneficial. Suddenly, Benesia speaks to the protagonist, saying she has a favor to ask, asking him to look after her daughter when she goes to present herself in his territory. She'll need someone to talk to in an unfamiliar place, and besides, he's the person closest to her. Hearing that, Asher accepts the request, thinking that he wanted to meet Valbarka anyway, because he wants to know how much he has changed. At that, time passes, and Asher and Rika were already heading toward the capital. The girl, however, didn't seem very happy, asking why her father had brought Karen along too. But then the guard says those are simply the Lord's orders. A flashback then appears with Leverok telling him to keep an eye on Asher. After all, maybe his real target had been Rika this whole time, which means he probably could have hidden his motives and planned this all along. After all, Asher wouldn't risk his life for a territory that had always hated him. The only person who truly acknowledged him and stayed by his side was Rika, and if she leaves, the boy might reveal his true hostility toward them. Either way, they'll just observe Asher's actions and discover his true intentions. Watching the situation, the guard thinks all of this was just a scheme to win Miss Rika's affection, and meanwhile, Asher thinks Leverok probably still doubts him. The guard was also pissed off, thinking that if the MC tries anything funny, he'll finish him off. I think this guy forgot the beating he took earlier. Next, Rika asks how much longer until they arrive, since they can't be that far away, right? The guard says they've already entered the Count's territory, so it should take half a day. Soon after, Asher says Bellaturia's territory has been isolated from the outside world for 20 years. Rika asks why, and Asher says he doesn't know, so it's surprising that they suddenly suggested an arranged marriage after all this time. But then the girl says it must be nothing serious, though she still wants to know why the Lord is called a hero. Karen says Valbarka was seen as a saint, not an ordinary lord. He was born into a very wealthy family and had the chance to live in luxury. But after witnessing the harshness of the world through his travels, he decided to abandon the life of a noble and become someone who cares for the sick and the weak. The guy was so good that he tore down his castle, sold all his treasures, and used the money to feed the hungry, and helped out on the farms. Man, the guy is awesome. Because of that, the villagers admired him for those actions, and that's how he earned the title of hero. Hearing the whole story, Rika says it isn't easy for a noble to live like that, and he must be a remarkable person. The guard says that's exactly right, and thanks to his influence, Bellaturia became a peaceful place with wonderful people. In any case, it's a place called a paradise, with no bandits or even murders. But suddenly a soldier arrives at the carriage saying that bandits have appeared, and I can already tell nothing good is going to come of this. Right away, Rika says that Karen had said there were no bandits there, but the poor guy didn't know what was going on either. Outside, those men didn't look very friendly, and Asher, getting down from the carriage, says he'll handle it, thinking those damn Motorola guys might have gone there too. He readies his sword, and in that same instant he realizes what was happening. After all, those people didn't look like bandits, right? Everyone there was starving to death, and Asher wonders if they really are bandits. Soon after, Karen appears saying that this is Lord Leverok's carriage, and if they take one more step, there definitely won't be any mercy. However, at the same time, Asher asks him to stop, because those people aren't bandits, they're just starving farmers. So to them, dying of hunger or by the slash of a sword is the same thing. So Asher hands over a bag of money, asking them to buy whatever they need. Man, but wasn't this city supposed to be like some kind of paradise? All the farmers leave giving thanks, and Karen says that money was his, but he still gave it away. But for Asher it makes no difference since he wasn't planning to use it. Besides, judging by the direction they were heading, it seems they fled from Bellaturia. Karen thinks that's impossible, and Rika asks what happened, but the MC replies that everything is already settled. So the girl goes back to the carriage, indignant that there are bandits at this point in the territory. Not to mention that they attack them, and this world is definitely getting more and more dangerous. Meanwhile, our protagonist was reflecting, wondering what was happening in that kingdom. The scene then finally shifts to Bellaturia territory, and our group had finally arrived. Everyone was looking up, surprised. After all, the castle is pretty huge, right? Rika asks if he hadn't said that Valbarka had destroyed his own castle and was living a life without any luxury at all, but Karen was also speechless at the sight. Suddenly someone welcomes them, saying that she must be Miss Rika along with her companions. Introducing himself, he says his name is Boros Bellaturia, and that it's a pleasure to meet them. Right away, the girl asks if he is her husband, and Boros replies that that is exactly the case. To be honest, it's not what I wanted. And hearing that, everyone is surprised. A little later, Asher was in the carriage, thinking that place had changed a lot. The village is completely ruined, but before it was a clean place with happy people. Reika asks if this is really Belaturia territory, and then Boros says that the mood there has been terrible recently. There have been several murders in recent days, so they should try to avoid eye contact with the villagers. Hearing that, everyone is surprised, and a little later they were eating at a table and Reika says that this place is a false paradise and a nest of bandits. On top of that, they're eating a banquet while the people outside are starving. Soon after, Karen says that this is not the kingdom he had known, and at that same moment Boros appears asking if they have finished their meal, mentioning that his father wished to see Reika. Karen tries to say something, but the boy mentions that he already knows what it is because this Belaturia is very different from the one he knew. Anyway, it's better not to keep him waiting too long because his father is nothing but a monster now. Man, he's changed a lot. A few minutes later, everyone was already in the Lord's Hall, and he, introducing himself, says that his name was Valbarka Belaturia. He heard they are from Iraq territory, and it must have been a long journey to get there. Even so, it doesn't matter because it is a small effort to answer the call of the hero's family. Meanwhile, Asher was watching everything from afar, thinking that Valbarka had changed a lot since the last time. The man kept staring at the girl, asking what her name was, and she replies that her name is Reika. Right away, the guy licks his lips, and Reika already realizes that nothing good is coming. Then, out of nowhere, Valbarka says that she has a lovely name. A little later, Reika was very upset, asking if she was really going to sleep in the Lord's room. Boros asks her not to feel guilty, because it is his father's wish to make her more comfortable. However, to Reika, all of this is very strange. And besides, she wanted to know what that guy was planning with that weird look on his face. A short time later, the scene shifts to the king's hall, where he asks his son if he remembers the story he used to tell him when he was a child. He had said to marry someone you love, but since he was not able to find a suitable wife, he planned to marry him to the daughter of the Iraq family. However, upon seeing the girl, she seemed more suitable as his wife, and he was thinking of giving another one to Boros. Man, this is going way too far. Boros asks what he meant by that, and then his father completely casually says that he is going to make Reika his concubine. A little later, the scene returns to the protagonist with Karen, reflecting on something. The guard asks how a lord could fall into such depravity, and Asher thinks that the Valbarka he remembers was kind and humble, and Belaturia was a beautiful and happy place. But now Valbarka has been consumed by arrogance and greed. As the lord gives himself over to alcohol and pleasure, it's no surprise that the villagers are desperate, and thus begin to steal, wondering whether this really is the person he had known in the past. At that very moment, someone knocked on the door, and the one standing there was Boros, mentioning that he had something to say. And a little later, Karen was furious, asking what had been said, wanting to know if Lord Valbarka was really going to marry Miss Reika. Boros says that's exactly it, and his marriage was annulled and his father will marry in his place. But even so, Karen still couldn't accept any of it. Without wasting any time, he immediately starts leaving the room, saying that he's going to bring Miss Reika back since he can't bear to see her being used. Our boy tries to stop him, but then Boros says it's fine. He is a loyal knight, so of course he understands his feelings, stating that from the very beginning he must never have wanted to see a political marriage. With exceptional talent in swordsmanship, he probably wanted Reika to follow the path of the sword. Surprised, Asher asks how he knows all that, and he replies that he has an information network and is well aware of the situation in the territory of Iraq. His father isolated the territory to prevent information from leaking out, and then hired an organization to obtain everything. He knows very well that the Lord did not sell his daughter into a political marriage for personal gain, but because her family comes from a powerful hero, so there was no way to refuse, right? All that even though that hero no longer existed now. His father ordered that Miss Reika stay in his room, which worried him, so he had her stay in the annex instead. In addition, he secretly opened the back door, asking that at dawn they take the girl and leave the territory immediately. As for the rest, there's no need to worry, because he will try to find a way to persuade his father. Hearing that, our boy was still processing everything, asking if he could know what had happened during all this time. And then Boros says that his father changed around 20 years ago. He began brutally exploiting the residents, taking all their resources, using them to build a palace, neglecting the people's suffering, all while the people were starving, and his father drowned himself in pleasure in the castle, completely ignoring the territory. At that, Asher says there was a time when that man was called a saint for loving the territory and its residents, and hearing that Boros just lets out a laugh, mentioning that in the past his father always told him something, that he would marry someone he loved. But 5 years ago, when he fell in love with a woman and brought her to introduce her to his father, something unexpected happened. She was a commoner, but still a good person. Anyway, the next day, the woman he loved was already dead, killed by his own father for feeling lust toward a noble. Just telling the story was already making the poor guy furious, asking if that is something a saint would do. Then Asher says that he gave him his trust, and because of that he will give him his loyalty. Boros asks what he means, but then when he looks to the side, the protagonist had already left. The scene then returns to the Lord, who continued, as always, drinking. He was already thinking about going to the room where Reika is. However, at that moment, our boy appears. He says that the Valbarka he knew barely drank alcohol, especially an expensive wine like that, because he refused it even when it was personally offered. Valbarka asks who he thinks he is, and then Asher asks the guy to say what the Oath of Belaturia is. Hearing that, the man doesn't seem to understand what the protagonist was talking about. At that moment, he realizes that he was not the real Valbarka, Without wasting any time, Asher draws his sword and charges at the Lord. Then, my friend, all you can see is blood spraying through the air, and at the same time the scene shifts to outside the castle. Reika asks where they are going, and the guard says they need to leave immediately, mentioning that surely nothing good is coming. That greedy lord had his eyes on her, and hearing that, the girl is obviously shocked on the spot. A little later, the two were already in the carriage, but at that very moment the soldier beside them says there are intruders in the castle, and the lord is being attacked. No one understood what was happening there, and the scene goes inside the castle. Then after they enter the lord's room, man, you already know what happened, right? Everyone saw the MC killing the lord, who was already crying on the floor. Boros even calls out his father's name, but then the protagonist says that wasn't his real father, but rather a creature that infiltrates human bodies by copying their appearance. To make it easier to understand, it was a demon. And after that, Boros questions whether he means it's a doppelganger. If that's the case, he's completely mistaken, asking if he thinks he's stupid enough not to be able to tell the difference between a human and a demon. If his father had been attacked by a doppelganger, he would have lost all his memories and wouldn't even have been able to recognize him, and probably would have attacked him. But his memory was perfect, and he still remembers absolutely everything. The only thing that changed over time was his personality, and even if he was a monster, he was still his father. He honestly thought that at some point he might change, but it's all over now. Asking what right Asher had to do this to him. Wow, things are heating up. Let's see. Asher remains silent, and at the same time, Boros orders them to attack him. However, at that very moment, everyone hears a laugh. Valbarka was actually a demon, saying that he had been found out. They're all idiots, and completely out of nowhere, the creature fully materializes. Everyone was watching what was happening, and poor Boros was still trying to process everything, wondering if that really was an actual doppelganger. The scene cuts back to the guard running through the castle corridor, wondering what the protagonist had done. Out of nowhere, a bunch of soldiers go flying, and then that demon charges at Boros. As casually as can be, he says it was very fun killing your beloved father, along with your wife. Karen then joins the fight to defend the boy, charging at the demon with his sword. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. He keeps unleashing a series of attacks, and the monster says he's actually pretty skilled for a human. But this little game is about to end, because there's no time to waste on him there, right? The two poor guys are thrown into the wall, and the demon, looking back, asks the protagonist how he dared to uncover his true identity. The MC says it was because of the Belaturia oath, since Valbarka always carried it in his heart and always spoke about it. Besides that, this guy had great faith in his people, and on top of that, he always used a phrase that was his very essence, asking how someone could talk about Valbarka without knowing that. Right after that, the demon says he didn't know there was something like that, and to fulfill his role as efficiently as possible, he studied a lot about how he should act. For 20 years, no one discovered his identity, but out of everyone, a brat like him figured it out in a single minute. Before killing him, he wanted to know something, asking who the boy really is. Who, completely calmly, says that he is literally a master swordsman. Just as he had said, his clan was wiped off the map, which, to be honest, was done by a human who was the master swordsman. He thought he had killed them all before, but it seems one still remained. Huh? Hearing that, the demon realizes who he was dealing with, but by then it was already too late, and the bastard kicked the bucket. On the other side, Boros was lying on the ground, and Asher asks if he was awake. The boy lifts his face, unable to believe that really was a doppelganger. He stares once more, and the protagonist helping the boy says that it had caught him by surprise. It seems this thing wanted revenge for something from the past, and Boros, looking at the protagonist, wonders how he knew all of this. At that very moment, Reika appears at the scene, and with her several soldiers also show up to help. And so one day passes, and the MC was looking at a gravestone that was probably the real Valbarka's. Boros also appears there, saying they built a tomb for his father. They recovered his body and established a memorial in his honor, even if it was late. Asher says he's sorry for his loss, but the boy says it's okay. His heart was broken, but he had been deceived by a demon without realizing it wasn't his father. Thanks to him, they managed to save the territory. And Asher asks what will happen to the kingdom of Belaturia now, and he replies that he will be in charge from now on, and that he needs to rebuild the houses that were attacked by demons, but he will never be as good a lord as his father. Hearing that, Asher remembers Valbarka saying that as a lord he is nothing, and that place only exists because of the people. To be honest, he is not in command and merely supports them, and that is how true nobility should be. At least those are the words he keeps in his heart and the words he tells himself every day. Man, this guy is a good person. And that right there is the so-called Belaturia oath. Next, Boros says that the protagonist had used the oath to expose the demon's weakness. However, this is a secret shared only among family and close friends, so he wanted to know how he knows about it, and besides that, how he is so well informed about demons. Asher realizes that his existence was becoming more and more suspicious, and a few minutes later, the scene returns to the Lord's castle. Karen says that a demon known as a doppelganger was imitating human beings by stealing their bodies, which means Lord Valbarka was being imitated by one as well. All of this was the work of a filthy demon, and hearing that, Reika asks him not to worry, because the marriage was cancelled. It was annulled because the demons arranged it against her will, and besides that, she will also leave that place as soon as possible. Going back to Boros, Asher makes up an excuse, saying he knew all of this because he is the master swordsman's apprentice, and that actually makes sense. He was a close friend of his father, and if he really is his apprentice, the boy could trust him. At that very moment, Boros kneels, saying that he is a great man and saved the kingdom of Belaturia. Right then, our boy is surprised. After all, a noble was bowing to a commoner, right? The boy in turn gives thanks, saying that if he has any request, he will do his best to fulfill it, all for the name of Belaturia. And after that, Asher smiles, thanking him in his thoughts, stating that he definitely inherited his family's humility and will surely become a great lord. A little later, the scene shifts to Leverok's castle, who cannot believe that the Lord of Belaturia was a doppelganger, assuming that was exactly what Hyben meant earlier. He was right about a global crisis, and his words came true first with the Motorola gang and then with the demons, and to be honest, he's afraid of what's coming next. Either way, they can't let their guard down. Even so, once again, Asher saved them and is slowly becoming a hero, which means it's about time to change your opinion of him. Wow, finally. He probably doesn't need to be so cautious anymore. And meanwhile, our boy was listening to everything through the door, wondering if Leverok will finally trust him. Honestly, he hopes Leverok doesn't suspect him anymore, since he's not interested in him after all, much less in staying in this place. So look at that, the MC wants to leave. After all, he's got a lot of work to do, right? Out of nowhere, the boy sensed a presence, telling them to show themselves now, and unbelievably enough, someone appears. The guy there said he heard his whole story, calling the protagonist a master swordsman. There is an intelligence organization called Topic, and when Belaturia was surrounded by demons, Lord Boros secretly sent the intelligence organization to maintain communication with the outside world. A flashback then appears, and Asher says he would like authorization to hire them, and Boros agrees since he no longer needs them. Anyway, he wanted to know why he needed them, and the boy says it was just for personal use. Boros says he feels like there's something more to this story, but either way he'll accept it, right? The scene then returns to the present, with that long-haired guy saying his name is Kairos, and that he is the head of the intelligence organization. Our boy greets him and says he's the new employer, and then the man says he looks familiar. Anyway, he had been impressed by his performance, and to be honest, the way he killed that doppelganger with a single attack was very frightening. Asher says he didn't even notice he was watching, and the man says that as the head of an intelligence organization, he should be able to go unnoticed, right? In any case, it seemed that doppelganger knew something about him. Even so, it doesn't matter, asking what he's going to do with an intelligence organization, and whether he's going to send them to look for some nobody. Our boy says it will be the whereabouts of the heroes, because in the past those who were called heroes either disappeared or were completely corrupted. One example is Ryban and Volbarka, since they had disappeared for 20 years. Volbarka's body was stolen by a doppelganger, and the other one was being hunted by several demons. Now that the demons have returned, the world is in danger, but they have no idea where the other heroes are, especially the one who defeated the Demon King and banished all demons from the world. Anyway, they're going to focus on the whereabouts of someone called Valorant. Hearing that, Kairos is surprised, saying he didn't think he would take this case. Then Asher asks if that's too much for a small intelligence organization like his. But then, my friend hit the guy's pride, and he says that of course that's not true, because there isn't a single piece of information in the world they can't find. And with everything settled, the guy, without wasting any time, is already going to do his job. A little later, Cairo was pissed off, saying his pride made him accept the offer, but he has no idea how to find information like that. He'll have to start with the capital. And looking to the side, he comes across the protagonist, calling him conceited. Anyway, he's quite an interesting person, and he'll definitely be hard to deal with. The scene changes to another place, with a villager asking if he heard the rumors, since Belaturia opened its borders. This is good for merchants, since there are more territories to trade with. And the other man asks why they had been closed for so long. The blondie says he thinks it was because of demons, but then the old man beside him says that doesn't make sense. Demons are a lie and died more than 50 years ago. In any case, there's no way demons could appear for no reason. They were horrible monsters and a lot of people died back then. The same goes for him, because he was almost trampled while fleeing with his mother. However, at that moment, someone appeared to save him. When he was just a little boy, he could only watch because the ones standing before him were the heroes. He only saw them that one time, but even so, he still clearly remembers all their faces. To sum it up, young people need to learn to appreciate the heroes, because without them, the world wouldn't be this peaceful. However, at that moment, a bunch of goblins suddenly appear all at once and charge at the carriage. No one understood what was happening, but by then it was already too late, right? A little later, the scene returns to the protagonist, who thinks that the beings that threatened human life have returned. The boy looks to the side, and then he sees Reika training. He calls out to her, and then says that everyone is there because of the demons, mentioning that the atmosphere is pretty tense. Reika says she had only seen demons in books, and hearing that, Asher thinks that's true, assuming that people of this era don't know much about demons, and that creates much greater suspense. At that very moment, everyone hears a scream, and then a villager appears, badly injured. The poor guy was begging for help, claiming that demons came out of the forest and attacked his carriage. Hearing that, our boy was still trying to process everything, and then the scene shifts to the carriage that had already been completely wrecked. Asher thinks this isn't the work of bandits, much less those footprints. He keeps analyzing all the evidence, and right after that, Reika finds someone unconscious and asks if he's alright. The old man still seemed to be alive, and Reika asked the guards to help him. The man finally opened up, saying they had been attacked by goblins. Asher thinks that, as expected, they had appeared. Monsters are extraterrestrial creatures of various races, and they were hostile and also a threat to humans. But just like the demons, they had all disappeared, making him wonder why they had returned. A little later, the old man had already been treated, saying that he is a merchant and was returning from a nearby estate loaded with goods. Goblins came out of the forest completely out of nowhere and attacked his carriage, stealing all the merchandise. Rika asks what goblins are, and the man says they are small monsters with green skin and pointy ears. At that, Asher joins the conversation, saying they disappeared from the world along with the demons 50 years ago. The old man is surprised that Asher knows anything about it, and our boy says he read about them in his history books. 50 years ago, the demons were killed by the heroes, along with every other being that threatened human existence. The passages to the demon realm were sealed along with the dragons, who were completely defeated. The monsters were driven far away from their domains. However, a heroine known as the Queen of the North Sea had monsters under her control in her territory. They stopped being hostile toward humans and lived in harmony with the other races. However, the monsters broke the Northern Order and are attacking humans. On top of that, with Ravinia missing, the North is in complete chaos. Right after that, Reika says that if the old man knows the goblins, he probably knows how to defeat them. But then the guy says he was too young at the time to know, and it was the adults who fought them. Besides, it was so long ago that probably not a single person alive knows that information. And so, a day passes, and Reika, while doing some shopping, says the city is in an uproar. On top of that, rumors about murderers and demons are spreading. Her father had a meeting with the vassals, and none of them seem to know anything about goblins or monsters, much less have books with that information. To make matters worse, there's no one who has ever faced monsters, and Asher thinks they're all already dead just like his original body. Goblins are a subrace of monsters and can be difficult in groups, but they're weak overall. However, in an era where no one has any common knowledge about monsters, they are completely terrifying. Continuing to walk through the streets, Rika says the city even has a bad atmosphere, and our boy thinks it would be better to quickly get rid of anything that stood in his way. Meanwhile, the girl was looking at Asher, and right away she realizes he had something in mind. A little later, Asher was leaving his room, thinking that it was time to go find those goblins, but out of nowhere someone bumps into him. It was Reika. She says she knew he wouldn't just sit still, and asks if he's going after the goblins. Either way, she's going with him, but then Asher says it's too dangerous. Besides, if the Lord finds out, he'll be furious. And Reika says it would set a bad example for the village if he found out Asher fought. Besides, they can't go through the front gate right now. The guards are keeping a heavy watch, so they're going to use a secret passage, she knows. With everything settled, a few minutes later, the two were leaving the castle. Reika asks if he knows where those goblins are, and the boy says they're going to the carriage that had been attacked. To make it easy to understand, they'll find their lair if they follow their footprints. Without wasting time, our boy starts running right away. And meanwhile, the boy had a bunch of monsters watching them. I can already tell this isn't going to end well. And to make matters worse, there's a goblin that seems very different from the others. Arriving at the place, Reika asks if they could go a little slower, and the protagonist says they're almost there, finding the fortress. He says that goblins love damp places, and a fortress in a place like that is actually pretty common. At that very moment, he notices something, and then the two of them crouch down. There were some goblins standing guard, and Asher says there's no need to be afraid. Either way, they should get rid of those two before anything else. At that very moment, the kid charges at the goblin, taking it down in a matter of seconds. The other one appears behind him. But of course our boy wasn't going to be defeated by it, right? Driving his sword into the goblin, he notices that the monster was still breathing. At that, he calls Reika, mentioning that she's the one who's going to kill that goblin. This is practice for real combat, because she needs to know what it feels like to take a life. And with no other choice, the girl grabs the dagger, starting to face the monster in front of her. She didn't seem very happy about doing that, but either way, she does what has to be done, right? The scene then shifts to the lair of those goblins, and Asher says they are savage, and on top of that, terrible fighters. But even so, they are very aggressive and extremely dangerous in groups. Then the girl says they are a threat to her territory, and that's why they must not be left unpunished. Observing the situation, our boy thinks that she shows no signs of shock after killing her first monster, which means she has a strong spirit. Then she immediately draws her sword, asking if she's going to finish them all off, but Asher tells her to wait there. After all, it's almost time for the goblins to go to sleep, and they'll go into their huts and won't come out during the night, because goblins are known for their short but deep sleep. In short, he's going to use this opportunity to move through their blind spots. Hearing that, the girl thinks he knows a lot and has maybe already faced some goblins. A little later, only one goblin was standing guard, and at that very moment our boy appears behind him. Without wasting any time, he draws his sword, and immediately finishes off the monster. Entering the hut, he notices everyone was asleep. So then, my friend, you already know what's going to happen, right? Asher thinks he knows it's cruel, but even so, they are still a danger to humanity. With everything settled, the first hut had already been cleared, and now there are only two left. But when he looks to the side, he notices a hut that was very different from the others. It seems to have been built by a human, and he wonders if that one belongs to the leader. Goblins are barbarians, so they don't have the technology to build a house like that, much less the intelligence to understand hierarchies. To make it easier to understand, they're just low-level monsters driven only by instinct. Either way, he needs to get rid of this first. And in the best-case scenario, it's just an abandoned house. But at that very moment, he hears a noise, and man, out of nowhere, a huge trap comes flying toward him. Our boy is shocked, wondering if the goblins were the ones who set this trap. Meanwhile, on the other side, Reika was still waiting for our boy, thinking she should have followed him earlier. Just then, she hears a noise, and then, as usual, some goblins appear. The poor girl was almost going into shock, trying to calm herself down, thinking they're just a few goblins. Either way, she should be able to beat him on her own. Then she draws her sword, already taking a fighting stance. However, someone tells the goblins to back away, mentioning that she is a human. That goblin there is very different, because he looks like a human. And looking at that situation, Reika didn't know what to do, wondering why that goblin was so big, and to make matters worse, could even talk. The monster keeps observing the girl, and then tells her to come at him. She remains in her defensive stance, asking if he really is a goblin. He replies that yes, he is, and that he is their leader, and just like her, he is a warrior training in the path of martial arts. Hearing that, Reika immediately thinks that this isn't just any goblin, but rather a monster with the body and intelligence of a human. Suddenly, the creature starts laughing, asking since when race mattered when it comes to martial arts. Anyway, they should stop this pointless chatter already, and drawing his spear, he tells her to fight already. But Reika, full of confidence, says he's no match for her, advancing toward the monster. Meanwhile, in the goblin's den, the protagonist seemed to be injured. He managed to stop the trap, but even so, he had let his guard down. Man, a whole bunch of goblins were staring at our boy, and he tells them all to come at him at once. What is this, feeling confident, huh? In the middle of that situation, he immediately activates his gloves ability, thinking he needs to get through them first. Everyone charges at him, and our boy summons a giant spear. The guy really knows what he's doing, and even though it's not a sword, he can still use it masterfully. Even so, he was having some kind of difficulty, thinking that the monsters just keep appearing. The scene then returns to Reika's battle, and the goblin says that she's actually not bad. Reika was still processing what was happening, asking why a monster was judging a human. She unleashes a series of strikes with her sword, surprised that that thing is blocking her attacks so easily. At that moment, the big brute jumps, saying that she's using too much strength, and that's why her movements are so unstable. In the middle of the battle, Reika wonders if this monster is really on the same level as the protagonist. Oh no, that's pushing it too far. There's no way a goblin could know that much about swordsmanship, but now she's going to start fighting for real. Using the Ravinia sword technique. Look at that. She already activated the cheats. The leader of the goblins merely watches and then says that she too is a fraud. Neither I nor the girl understood what the goblin said, and at the same time the monster strikes with his spear, which simply breaks Reika's sword. He tells them to get this over with already, and once again charges at the girl, throwing her far away. A little later, the scene returns to Asher, who had already finished off all the goblins, saying he can't believe these monsters did all this. Goblins have the habit of coating their weapons with poison, and a small dose of it is enough to kill hundreds of humans. Since he was hit by that poison, he thinks he's going to die right there, and so he collapses unconscious to the ground. Returning to the other battle, Reika had been defeated, and the goblin was surprised that she was still alive. Honestly, that armor had saved her, and meanwhile the girl thinks she can't move. Then the monster tells her to die with honor like a human warrior. He was about to deliver the final blow, and Reika wonders if this was how she was going to be killed. The poor thing still wasn't prepared for this. But at that very moment, something hits the goblin's spear. I don't know how, but the protagonist was still alive, saying that was a close one. The goblin starts staring at our boy, and then says he's very brave, surprised that he's still alive. And Asher, surprised that this goblin can talk, says he noticed the habits of his goblins. After all, he's familiar with the trick of poisoning their weapons, and that's why he coats his own weapons with an antidote so he can survive. Wow, you could have said that earlier, huh? Anyway, that kind of preparation is essential when facing goblins. At that, the leader is surprised because the boy even knows their tactics, mentioning that he's actually pretty smart. Then Asher leans Reika against a tree, saying to leave the rest to him. Getting up, he asks if he's the leader of the goblins, and the monster replies that yes, he is, and that his name is Tarkin, and he's an aspiring martial artist. Asher thinks that's pretty interesting because he's basically a goblin with the body and mind of a human. At that, the monster says he's the one to blame for interfering in a fair duel, asking if he's ready to face the consequences. Of course, the kid was pretty confident, telling him to bring it on. And without wasting any time, the leader of the goblins does exactly that. He strikes at the protagonist, but he manages to block it. The monster keeps unleashing a flurry of attacks, and Asher thinks these aren't the attacks of a normal goblin. He doesn't rely on brute force alone, but also on movements refined through countless hours of training and practice. Anyway, it's been a very long time since the last time he faced an opponent this good, so our boy counterattacks, and the goblin is sent flying. He says this is the perfect swordsmanship he always wished for, mentioning that Asher is truly powerful. This is his lucky day because he met humans who are actually decent. In any case, they're going to start fighting seriously now, charging at the protagonist. Meanwhile, Reika was still injured, watching the whole battle from afar, thinking that the goblin's movements have no elegance at all, much less skill. But even so, the spear movements are practically perfect, and unbelievably enough, that monster resembles the protagonist. Soon after, she falls unconscious, and the goblin asks if Asher is already tired. Asher says he doesn't have time to waste talking to him right now, but the goblin says he won't let him go. However, our boy says he knows that he will, and at that very moment, the forest starts to catch fire. The goblin looks back and then realizes that his village was on fire. Asher says he has to exterminate them by whatever means necessary, and having no other choice, the goblin decides to flee the fight. After all, he can't let his people burn to death. They'll finish this another day, and they'll probably meet again soon. And so all the monsters flee, and Asher, approaching Reka, thinks that she fought well. After all, she was basically facing a superhuman completely on her own. Anyway, they need to return to the capital at once, to warn them that the goblins are attacking the region. A little later in the Lord's castle, Karen tells them to protect the castle. At that very moment, someone calls the guard, and it was the protagonist saying he has something to show him. And throwing a sack onto the ground, he asks him to take a look. And at that very moment, everyone is surprised by what they saw. Basically, it was a goblin, and Asher asks if it's the first time he's seen one in person. They're the ones responsible for planning to attack Erac's territory. To make it easy to understand, they'll be arriving soon, so they have to prepare for war immediately. A day passes, and Rika was still resting. She opened her eyes and then finds her father and mother in the room. Venetia asks how she's feeling, but the girl tells her not to worry. Leverok, without wasting any time, asks if it was Asher who took her out there, but then she says it's not the protagonist's fault. After all, she was the one who wanted to follow him. She went with him even after he said it was dangerous, and thanks to that, she gained combat experience and also became mentally stronger. Besides that, he also saved her when they fought the leader of the goblins, mentioning that Asher is fighting for his own life as well as for the good of the territory. And with no other choice, her father finally calms down, thinking that Reka is right. While everyone in the territory is full of fear and anguish, Asher went out and personally brought back a goblin, thinking that he's no different from a hero. And man, I don't know why, but now the soldiers are training in front of that thing. Asher was watching everything from above, and Leverok says he ordered that thing to be hung there. That way the soldiers can get rid of their fear and become more cautious. Changing the subject, he asks what he thinks of his soldiers, and Asher says they're good and will have a chance to win. Then the man thanks him from the bottom of his heart as the Lord of Eric. Hearing that, our boy is surprised, wondering if he's earned Lord Leverok's trust, saying he's giving him too much credit. Besides that, he wanted to talk about his daughter, but then Leverok says that she went to the training grounds to practice as soon as she woke up. She could live a comfortable life, but even so, she still wants to make all this effort. At that, the two go talk to Reka, and her father asks if she's okay. He replies that he can handle it just fine. Leverok says that she's just as troublesome as her brother, and she says it's disappointing to be compared to Luke. He's an idiot who's always hiding in his own room, and she definitely has to become stronger in his place. Our boy was just listening to the conversation, wondering if he had been traumatized after that day. Either way, they have to help him come back to reality. Right then, the lady asks Asher if his arm was hurt. He replies that it's fine, and that he had only been injured by goblin poison. Rika says it's alright since he recovered right away because he had already been prepared. Asher says that goblins have a habit of coating their weapons with lethal poison, so they need to be ready for that. After all, they'll win if they have armor and medicine prepared. However, the current problem is the goblin leader, who possesses human-like physical and martial abilities, which means Asher will probably be the one to face him. Meanwhile, a bunch of goblins were gathered in a cave, and man, would you look at that, the leader is still alive. He thinks his race is naturally weak and lacking in intelligence, and that is exactly why he wants to become more powerful. He gained intelligence and physical abilities that surpass the limits of goblins, and that is why he needs to protect his race. At that very moment, a voice begins echoing in his head, ordering him to kill the humans. To the goblin, that is a curse, wondering why he has to suffer just to gain intelligence. In the end, he is only a puppet following orders, but at least he managed to gain something because of it. This world is full of frauds, and it was the first time he had met a human like himself. At that, the goblin stands up, telling everyone to gather. Beginning to give a speech, he says they will get rid of the humans, and shortly after that, we see all the goblins attacking the fortress. The soldiers realize that the monsters had already arrived, and Karen orders them to raise their weapons. This is their land, so they must not let those monsters attack it. The goblins begin climbing the wall, but the soldiers were prepared to defend it. Man, the fight there was brutal, and it definitely won't be over anytime soon. Leverok was also there raising his sword just for show, ordering them to stop the goblins and protect the territory of Iraq. The scene then shifts to Luke's room, and the kid, to be honest, didn't look very well. At that very moment, Asher appears in his room, telling him to pull himself together already, because everyone inside the castle is fighting the goblins right now. But the poor guy is in shock and says he can't do anything, asking how he could possibly help in the fight. He isn't strong like him and Reka. Besides, he's nothing but useless, and will only be the successor of Iraq's territory on paper. Man, this guy has changed a lot. Looking at that, Asher thinks his self-esteem has hit rock bottom, but he needs to find a way to strengthen his heart. And tossing him his sword, the protagonist tells Luke to catch it, asking if he's going to keep doing nothing even if the land burns and the people die, wanting to know how a coward like him could ever become the lord. He is the one who will become the lord of this land, so he has to fulfill his duty. At that, the kid keeps staring at the sword, and then, he finally regains his determination. Without wasting any time, he leaves his room, and meanwhile the soldiers kept fighting in the battle. Suddenly, some goblins appear behind Karen, but then Reka shows up to save the day. She asks how the battle is going, and the guard says they definitely have the advantage. The goblins may have numbers, but their strength and coordination are poor, and the soldiers of Iraqi territory are managing to defend themselves. Either way, he is sure they will come out victorious. Meanwhile, the girl thinks they still have a long road ahead. After all, the real danger is yet to come. Speak of the devil, that damned goblin appears, saying that as expected, it's impossible to let those guys take the castle on their own. Either way, his brothers did a great job, and now they should let him move forward. On the other side of the battle, the soldiers were wondering if it was all over, but Karen tells them to stay alert and help the wounded. However, at that very moment, that same goblin from before appears, saying that they had let their guard down. He attacks several soldiers, and right away Reika realizes that he was the leader of the goblins. No one understood what was happening, and Karen orders everyone to attack. However, Reika tells them not to do it, because that bastard is different. But it was already too late to call off the attack, and the soldiers charge toward the monster, who says he doesn't have time to play with them. After all, they are all frauds. In a matter of seconds, the goblin defeats a huge number of soldiers, and Karen couldn't believe what he had seen. The goblin starts walking calmly, asking if she isn't the woman he saw in the forest, and if the one by her side is the leader of those weaklings. But it's a shame, because he has no business with frauds like them, ordering her to hand over that human right now. But Karen asks what he was talking about, and the leader of the goblins says it's the protagonist, because he is the true man who can wield a sword, telling them once again to bring him immediately. But Karen says that of course he won't do that. Obviously, not unless he killed him first. Reika says that goblin is dangerous, but the guard tells her not to worry because he'll handle it, thinking it's just a measly goblin that couldn't surpass a human's swordsmanship. The goblin tells him to come at him with everything he's got, and then Karen does exactly that. The two clash their blades, and the guard says he's going to take his head home. Reika was watching everything from afar, thinking that Karen is a high-level swordsman, even recognized within the Empire. But the monster acts as if it were fighting an inexperienced child. The goblin says he has the qualities of a warrior, but even so, it's still not enough. The guard can't believe what just happened, and in the very next instant he's thrown back. Part of his armor is destroyed, and the goblin completely immobilizes him, saying that he's also a fraud who relies on tricks. This lunatic really can't win a battle, huh? But of course Reika wasn't going to let that happen so easily. However, at that very moment, the protagonist appears, and the goblin says he was waiting for him. Asher says he feels the same way too. After all, he's not done with him yet. Our boy draws his sword, and then tells the monster to come at him with everything it's got. But the creature says human swordsmanship is no match for his. There is only one human worthy of facing him, and it is the protagonist alone. The two blades meet, and the monster says this is the true swordsmanship he had been searching for. Basically a battle of pure skill. And meanwhile, Reika was helping Karen. At that very moment, Luke appears, and the guard says it's dangerous for him to stay there and that he should go inside the castle. But the boy says he is the heir to the territory and can't just stand by. He may not be able to fight, but he will be with them on the battlefield. Changing the subject, he asks where the protagonist is, and Reika says he's facing the leader of the goblins. The goblin says it's a lot of fun to fight someone seriously without any kind of deception. Taking that chance, Asher says he wanted to ask something, wanting to know what he means by deception, and the goblin says it's human swordsmanship. Humans honor heroes with false power, asking how the swordsmanship of such beings could be real. At that moment, our boy is shocked, wondering if their swordsmanship, which is said to be beyond human strength, is really genuine. The monster then says he is different, because he managed to reach the purest form of swordsmanship. Besides that, he is the only person there worth facing. At that very moment, he charges at Asher, who is still thinking that he doesn't understand. To sum it up, heroic swordsmanship is not real, but imperial swordsmanship is. He gives a smile, but then thinks that obviously isn't true. And while holding the monster's spear, he says he can tell that he's quite intelligent. But he shouldn't judge human swordsmanship by thinking swordsmanship should transcend limitations. The heroes save the world using that power, and no human can reach a level greater than the heroes. To be honest, not even he is a true swordsman yet, because he died as soon as he reached the level he had desired his whole life. In short, he's just an old swordsman who only knows imperial sword technique, saying that for a barbaric race like his swordsmanship must seem quite advanced. However, he does not know humanity's true limits, much less how powerful they are. At that very moment, our boy lands a strike on the goblin, who ends up gravely wounded. And the kid, completely calm, says the goblin is pretty weak. The monster falls to the ground in a matter of seconds, and meanwhile, everyone was watching that from afar. However, the creature was still conscious, and after getting back up, Asher stands in front of it, saying that he would be dead if the cut had been a little deeper. But either way, he won't kill him now. After all, he will be arrested and judged for what he did. And having no other choice, the monster says he won. Now he can do whatever he wants. And then Asher says he wants to ask a question, wanting to know why he invaded them. And the creature says it's because he was ordered to. The demons were the ones who did this, and sent him to free his people to invade the humans. Asher thinks it's similar to the last demonic invasion, because even back then, some monsters attacked humans under the demon's orders. The Demon King was the one behind everything, assuming that guy really has been resurrected. Then the goblin says that, as he said, he is just a puppet controlled by a superior being. He used to be no different from any other goblin, but he was smarter than most, and because of that he managed to improve his spear technique. Because of that, he often fought against other races to test his skills. However, that didn't change the fact that goblins are monsters at the bottom of the power hierarchy, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't overcome the limitations of his race. Then one day, that blessed person appeared, who was simply a high-ranking demon. He gave him intelligence and a superior body, and in return he received orders to invade the humans. But now that he has been defeated, he has no excuse to go back there. Now he's going to see what human prisons are like, and Asher says he will be escorted there. With everything settled, the monster is finally arrested, and the soldiers are happy to have won the battle, saying that humans are superior. Reika says he is surprisingly calm, and Asher says he has already accepted defeat, thinking that for now they are safe. But with the Demon King's resurrection comes the beginning of an even greater crisis. And so a day passes, and the walls were being rebuilt, little by little. Leverrock thanks the protagonist, saying that he saved the mansion from destruction, and Asher says he only did his part as a member of it. However, the man says that's not the only thing he's grateful for, because Luke has gotten much better, and that's good news. He even volunteered to help the soldiers repair the walls. Besides that, about the goblin, Karen is keeping an eye on him. But something doesn't seem right. Asher says he has to send him to the Empire for an investigation. And then Leverrock hands him a paper and says there's a message. After the invasion of a mimic and goblins, the Empire has noticed a new crisis, which means they'll be sending someone soon. A bunch of carriages were passing through the city, and the villagers wanted to know who it was, even assuming it was Haben. However, the person inside the carriage didn't seem to be human. The scene then shifts to the protagonist training. Reika asks if he wants her to learn Imperial swordsmanship, and Asher says she doesn't practice it for some reason. However, the girl says that whenever she looks at him, she becomes convinced that Imperial swordsmanship is amazing. Even so, Asher says she'll be disappointed after learning it, thinking that there were many children like her in his past life, many aspiring swordsmen who wanted to become his disciples, but he taught them only simple, repetitive sword techniques without any special skills. Because of that, many left disappointed except for a single boy, and because of that, he wonders how he's doing now. Next, Reika mentions that someone is coming from the Empire, and Asher says the Lord told him. Also, the captain of the guard is a dark elf too, and the moment he hears that, our boy is shocked. The scene changes to inside the castle, and Leverrock was welcoming the group that had arrived. The girl says it's a pleasure to meet him, saying she is the captain of the guard named Irina Vasilis. Suddenly a flashback appears, with Asher looking at a place engulfed in flames. Suddenly someone calls out to him, and it was Hyban, saying that in the end they burned away their own lives. With that, the Dark Elves were completely wiped out, and Asher says they brought it on themselves. After all, a global crisis almost happened because of the Elder Elf. Anyway, your job here is done, so leave, asking them to call him if they need anything else, and Hyban tells him to return safely. A little later, our boy was walking alone through the forest, and at that very moment he hears a noise. He wonders what it could be, because it sounds like a child crying. Going deeper into the forest, then he comes across a dark elf. Judging by the clothes, she must be the elder's child, and unbelievably she managed to save her own daughter, wondering what sin she must have committed to deserve this. But surprisingly, Asher reaches out his hand, saying she could come with him if she wanted, asking what her name is. And man, wouldn't you know it, this dark elf was the girl the protagonist had saved. Returning to the present, the girl had already met up with Asher's group, and then Leverrock introduces the boy, saying he is an excellent swordsman who contributed greatly to the annihilation of the goblins. Irina looks at our boy, and then says it's a pleasure to meet him. The two greet each other, and a little later, Leverrock says that Asher will explain everything that has happened so far. The two were seated at the table, and Asher thinks it's very strange. After all, he's basically staring at his adopted daughter from his past life. Irina is the only surviving dark elf, and his adopted daughter. Long ago, the dark elf elder, driven by her hatred of humans, tried to completely destroy the world. All of that by using forbidden magic to summon monsters from another dimension. But she couldn't control the wild power of those creatures, and so the dark elves were completely annihilated. The elder, absorbed by the creatures, was barely stopped by the heroes, and after that, our boy burned the forest, which had been corrupted by the creature's energy. After that, he ended up adopting the orphan, and then she quietly followed him but didn't show him any more affection than necessary. To be honest, he didn't seek her love either. After all, it was humans who burned her home and killed her family, and she should have resented that. But it's almost funny that she followed the same path as him and became captain of the guard. Next, Irina calls out to the protagonist, saying that she came there at Lord Hyban's request, and since he couldn't come personally, he trusted her to come in his place. Anyway, they get straight to the point, and first of all, the Empire does not trust him. The information she needs to pass on is a crucial secret, and even if he is Hyban's disciple, it's hard to speak freely. But Asher thinks all of that is understandable. After all, a child who knows demons appears out of nowhere and defeats them. From the Empire's perspective, that must be extremely confusing. At that, Irina says that the reason Lord Hyban trusts him is because of his swordsmanship, asking him to show her that skill, and besides that, it is a request from the Empire. Hearing that, Asher remains silent, thinking that Irina should know his swordsmanship well. She was always watching him, but anyway, he's going to do what she asked. Our boy grips his sword firmly, and then a flashback appears, with Hyban saying that child reminds him of his father. Arena says she's not convinced, and Hyban says the swordsmanship and even the way he speaks are incredibly similar. If that's the case, she should see for herself what it's like. And so, the scene returns to the present, and the girl thinks it's impossible for someone who resembles her late father to exist. So wow, she really does see the MC as a father figure. Asher says he's going to begin the demonstration now, and then he begins sword training. Every one of his strikes had a purpose, and the girl watches everything closely. At that moment, she notices how similar the two are, but of course they're literally the same person. But she doesn't know that, and so she was captivated by that skill. A little later, Leverrock was talking with his daughter, saying that she had received an acceptance letter from the academy. It was personally delivered by the captain of the Imperial Guard, and Reika, overjoyed, thanks him for everything. Her father says that with a proper education, she'll be able to develop her talents even further, and since they'll be going to the capital soon, they should prepare. Walking down the hallway, the girl was happily thinking that getting into the academy almost felt like a dream. The Imperial Academy is the place that produced great first-class master swordsmen and the most prestigious school in the Empire, and countless swordsmen from across the kingdom gather there, and it would be great if the protagonist could come too. After all, he is surely the greatest talent in the Empire. Thinking that she should convince him so they can go to the academy together, he surely wants to see a broader world. And meanwhile, the kid keeps training non-stop. The guy is disciplined. He was still thinking about his adopted daughter, and a flashback appears from a little earlier. The boy says he had finished the demonstration, asking whether she had been able to confirm her doubts. But the poor girl rushes off in a hurry, and returning to the present, Asher thinks she must have been surprised. After all, she had basically just seen a child she had never met before, using her late father's swordsmanship. At that very moment, Asher notices something, asking how long the girl had been standing there. All flustered, she apologizes if she interrupted him, but Asher says that's not the case, thinking that she's still watching just like before. Changing the subject, the girl thanks him for accepting her request for a swordsmanship demonstration. His skill resembles that of someone she knows very closely, and that's why she got so confused, apologizing for not being able to explain the situation properly. Asher says he's glad it wasn't anything serious, asking if her check was complete, and the girl replies that it is. Honestly, she trusts him and is going to share confidential Imperial information. She mentions that in the past, during the Age of Wars, various heroes protected the world, such as the great mage who defeated the demon race. At present, those heroes are missing, and the ones who ruled the land suddenly vanished after destroying their own domains. On top of that, as he knows, Valbarca was consumed by the demon race. Among them, the situation in the north is more serious due to Ravinia's absence. Because of that, control over the region has completely collapsed, and monsters are invading the entire territory. To make matters worse, communication with the Archmages and the Dragon Slayers' castles has been cut off. In short, the world is in complete chaos, and Asher thinks all of this is already to be expected, asking what happened to Hyban, and Arena says he left the Empire. He had received an Imperial order to discover the hero's whereabouts and observe the world crisis. Before leaving, he asked her to relay the situation to Asher, wanting to know what the boy is really going to do now. Isn't he going to help save the world? Our boy grows thoughtful, wondering if she wanted him to fight against a crisis like this just as before. Either way, he's going to do absolutely nothing. In any case, he doesn't want to waste his time on something so honorable, thinking that he is not a hero and all he desires is the path of the sword, and that's how it will be from now on, living and wielding his sword. He never had the chance to be a hero, and he won't become one either, and the only thing he will do is cut down those who stand in his way. Right after that, the girl is surprised but ends up accepting Asher's answer, saying that Hyban said he is someone who never changes, and also said he would spend his entire life wielding a sword. In that sense, he is very similar to someone she knows, and Asher just watches the girl as she speaks because she's my friend. He knows that she knows. Arena asks what his plans are now, and Asher says he's going to a place called the Gate of Swords, thinking that he needs to learn the secret of his reincarnation, and if that guy is there, maybe he can answer all his questions. Arena asks why he wants to go to that place, and at that very moment, Reika calls out to the protagonist, saying that she got an acceptance letter from the Imperial Academy, so they should go together. And hearing that, the girl immediately takes advantage of the situation, saying that it sounds interesting too, asking why he doesn't accompany them to the Empire. Asher becomes deep in thought, and then he ends up accepting. After all, it might be good to spend a little more time together, because at some point he'll have to say goodbye to Reika. With everything settled, Reika was admitted to the Imperial Academy, and then a crowd gathered to bless the girl's future. It was even starting to look like a wedding, and the whole little group was gathered there. The family was there saying their goodbyes, and Leverrock asks her not to worry about the territory because Karan and Luke will protect it. Man, it doesn't even seem like Luke was depressed a few chapters ago. Anyway, he hopes she becomes the Empire's greatest swordswoman. Meanwhile, Asher was wondering how the demon race had revived. A lot of questions torment his mind, so he plans to set out in search of all the answers. Honestly, he didn't want to do anything, but those questions will end up blocking his path, so he needs to resolve them personally. With everything settled, Leverrock asks them to be careful while transporting him, and man, the goblin is going to be taken away. Arena then calls out to the monster, saying that he will be detained in the Empire's prison for the rest of his life once the investigation is over. The monster was all stoic, saying he had no choice since he's a loser, and they can do whatever they want. So after all that mess, the carriage finally sets off, and everyone was looking at the goblin who had caused chaos in the territory. Everyone starts looking down on him, and the monster already realizes that his stay won't be easy, but he'll definitely be free. Man, this guy is really optimistic, huh? A little later, Reika says she has a question, wanting to know how she became the captain of the Imperial Guard, because it must have been hard for a dark elf to adapt to the human world. She says the reason she became the captain of the Imperial Guard was to follow in the footsteps of someone she respects, and you know who that is, my friend. Reika asks who it would be, and she says it was the father figure who had taken care of her whole life. Dark elves always hated humans, and that was what they taught her. But after her race was completely destroyed, there was one person who approached her even though she was the only survivor, a presence without any caution or hostility at all, and he was the captain of the Imperial Guard. To sum it up, he took care of her as if she were his daughter, and although he was stern on the outside, he was very affectionate on the inside, so his self-discipline was an inspiration to her when she was a child. But unfortunately, he ended up passing away, and in any case, his image remains in her heart. Hearing that, Asher casually asks if the one she said resembles him was her father. The girl says that's exactly right, and Asher asks what aspects of him she respected. Arena grows thoughtful and then says it was his swordsmanship. Even though her father was not called a hero, he reached another level of swordsmanship by training his whole life, and she respected him for that, so she wanted to copy that aspect of her father. After following his swordsmanship, she managed to reach this position, and Asher thinks he really was an idiot. Before he was worried because he thought she hated him, but actually she thought very highly of him. Right after that, Reika says that if that's the case, her father probably could have reincarnated, and at that very moment someone appears asking for help, mentioning that he came from a nearby village and that bandits are attacking and kidnapping people. Without wasting time, the protagonist gets out of the carriage and hurriedly says he's going to check everything personally. Reika says she'll also go assess the situation, and Arena asks them to take care of that guy. And right after that, the goblin says those are demons. This isn't the work of human bandits, and maybe she can't sense it, but he can feel a familiar aura, which is probably that of demons. Anyway, it's better to be careful. Then the scene shifts to that blasted village, which wow, was completely wrecked. Asher and Reika were looking at the situation from afar, and the girl asks who the hell would do something like that. When they look to the side, they come across some humans taking people away in a wagon. The man then looks back, but Asher cuts him down in a matter of seconds. The other bandits charge at him, and Reika asks if these guys are bandits. Asher says they're human traffickers, a criminal organization that kidnaps people and sells them to nearby continents, thinking that he dealt with them many times in his past life. After all, there are places where this kind of thing is discreetly allowed. Under Imperial law, the buying and selling of humans is punishable by death, which means that if he wiped out everyone there and then, there would be no problem. Then, my friend, the kid starts cutting everyone down, and Reika, unbelievably enough, does the same too. Yeah, now it's within the law, the guys kick the bucket, and Asher finishes them all off without mercy. With that, the villagers are freed, thanking the knights. Next, Arena appears at the scene asking if they're all right, and then Asher says that the citizens there lost their homes, suggesting that they should take them to the Empire to help them. Agreeing to do that, Arena escorts the villagers, and so everything is resolved. At that very moment, someone calls Asher brother, and the boy, looking down, realizes it was just a child. The little boy thanks him for saving him, and Asher thinks that they were even trying to kidnap children, mentioning that it could have been a huge disaster, saying he only did what had to be done. At that very moment, he notices something, apparently recognizing that mark. Thinking about what he understands about that child, the scene then shifts somewhere else, and Asher says he would like to talk a little about that child, asking if a certain Lord Crocus is the Empire's master of the depths. The surprised girl asks how he knows that, and Asher says he heard it from Lord Hyban. After all, that child has his mark on his forehead, which means he is the successor to the master of the depths. This man is also known as the subterranean hero, and there is a rift to the demon realm beneath the Empire that was once an invasion route for the demons, because the waves from the demon realm can threaten the surface. The master of the depths was then tasked with sealing the rift with a magical barrier. Basically, he's the one who secretly protects the world, but he's also a hero who has to live alone underground for his entire life. Arena says that for security reasons this wasn't made public, but Lord Crocus is also one of the great heroes. He's the one who blocks the waves from the demon realm at its border with the surface, and meanwhile Goblin was listening to everything from afar, thinking he already understood everything, and the demonic energy he felt earlier came from that child. He's surely destined to live surrounded by the air of the demon realm. To be honest, it feels very nostalgic. Then the scene shifts to inside the carriage, with Arena asking what that child's name is. He replies that his name is Garen, and that he had been enjoying his vacation before the final succession ceremony for the Master of the Depths. Then he ended up stopping at that village when the traffickers captured him. Asher says he was lucky, and Reika says it'll be hard to live underground for the rest of his life doing the Master of the Depths job. But the boy says it's fine because life out here was already harder. In the past, he was an orphan and begged for alms during the day while spending the nights in the alleys, but luckily that place was the passage leading to Lord Crocos's domain, but the place was filled with energy from the demon realm, so normal people couldn't enter. After that, he ended up staying with that old man and became his disciple. And a few years later, His master offered him the position of successor to the Masters of the Depths. He had nowhere else to go and respected his master, so he ended up agreeing to become his successor. Back in the present, Reika says it must have been a difficult choice, and the boy says that when they arrive at the Empire, he'll meet his master and go through the succession ceremony. Meanwhile, our boy was deep in thought, reflecting that in their youth they had served together in Eric's territory. And honestly, he hasn't seen him since he went to the Empire to receive the succession ceremony, and he must have aged a lot, wondering if he might be able to see his old friend again. A little later, the group finally arrived at the other Empire, and the soldiers were there to welcome Arena. She says those are the villagers who were attacked by the traffickers, and asks them to prepare temporary accommodations for them. At that, Garen thanks them for everything, and then says goodbye to the group. Next, Arena calls the two of them, saying that she'll guide them to the Empire tomorrow. Anyway, she'll show them the lodgings where they'll be staying that night. A little later, Asher was in his room thinking about how it had been such a long time, thinking that this was the dormitory he stayed in when he worked for the Empire. Basically, absolutely nothing had changed, and sitting on the bed, he asks why that man still hasn't shown up. Kairos appears out of nowhere, and the protagonist says it's very easy to detect his presence. The boy just lets out a laugh, and Asher asks if he found any information on the hero's whereabouts, and the man says of course he did. And taking out a paper, he says this is a copy of the Empire's confidential documents. It contains the time when the heroes disappeared and the location of their territories. Wow, the guy is actually pretty useful. Changing the subject, he mentions that the atmosphere in the Imperial Castle is pretty ominous, mentioning that he heard the master of the underworld disappeared out of nowhere. Man, I can tell that's not good. A little later, Asher was eating and Reika says she doesn't know where Arena is. It would be nice if they could have breakfast together, but anyway, she said she would guide them to the Empire that day. At that very moment, a soldier appears, saying that his name is Kame and that he is the leader of the security squads responsible for guiding them. Reika asks if Arena isn't coming, and Kame says the captain had to leave because of some matters, so he'll guide them to the academy. Right away, Asher more or less realizes what was going on, wondering if she had gone to look for Crocus. A few minutes later, Reika was looking at the Empire's capital, saying that the place is very fancy. Big cities really are different, and Asher thinks that the reason the Empire had been so peaceful all this time was because Crocus protected the world from the demon realm. Besides that, with the succession ceremony approaching, it's impossible that he would just disappear out of nowhere, and he wonders what really happened. Soon after, Reika notices the boy's concern, but of course he says it's nothing, and Kane says he must be homesick while being in this place. Anyway, they'll be arriving at the academy very soon, and he'll make sure they're comfortable. Asher accepts it all and thinks that somehow this isn't strange. After all, it was in the Empire that he spent most of his life. A short while later, Reika says that place looks bigger than Ariake Castle, and Asher, feeling all melancholic, thinks that it's been a long time since he last saw the academy. Basically the place where Hyban and he spent their entire youth. The scene shifts to inside the academy, and the old woman there says that before she had wanted to know where Reika was from, but now she knows it's from the territory where Karen is. The girl asks if she knows the guard, and she says of course she does, since he's a first-rate swordsman produced by the academy. Besides, she thinks there's no one in the Empire capable of defeating him, since he's my partner, so how are we supposed to tell her that the MC beat the guard up? Anyway, the academy doesn't accept students without abilities, and there will be a duel as an entrance exam. Asking if she's going to participate, and Reika, without wasting any time, says of course she will. With everything settled, the old woman says she'll guide them to the duel site. Then Asher calls out to Reika, saying that he has to take care of a few things, so he'll have to leave for a while. Reika says it would be nice if he could watch the duel, but Asher says there's no way she won't pass. After everything is settled, Asher asks the guard to look after the girl, and without wasting any time, he starts to leave, thinking that he needs to find the sword gate. A few minutes later, Reika was finally at the test site, and the man says he's the professor in charge of the new students, mentioning that he won't go easy on her just because she's a noble, and before the sword, everyone is equal. If she can block his attack and land a single valid hit, she passes. The guy then raises his sword, and the old woman beside him says that he's a professor who used to be one of the Imperial Knights. Kame was watching the duel too, thinking that the Academy's entrance test is known for its difficulty. Wanting to know how skilled Reika was, you're about to see, my friend. It's no wonder she's the protagonist's disciple, and when the guy charges at her, she already swings her blade. A few seconds later, a sword is shattered in the air, and of course Reika had managed to win, right? Everyone was surprised by what had happened, because a student had literally just taken down a professor. The guy remains lying on the ground, and Heike was trying to understand what had happened. After all, that dude there is way too weak. The supervisor was also shocked, but still passes the girl. The scene in turn shifts to the city, and the protagonist thinks that he's finally arrived at the Blessed Sword Gate. That is a famous place coveted by swordsmen from various countries, and to reach the inside you need to pass through 3 gates. Only those with a high level of swordsmanship can open them, and when one gate opens, another appears behind it. Many swordsmen tried to open them to test their skills, but so far no swordsman has managed to reach the interior. Even first-rate swordsmen barely managed to get past the first gate, and not even Hyban managed to open the last one. The space beyond the 3rd gate remains a mystery. Then the scene changes to that blessed place. Some people were trying to open the gate, and obviously that poor guy there wasn't going to manage it, right? At that very moment, Asher appears at the place and the blonde guy asks if he's going to try to open the sword gate, and Asher, completely casually, says that's exactly what he's going to do. The other guy says it won't be easy because that one over there is the best student at Point Academy and has been trying for an hour but still hasn't managed it. Asher then places his hand on the gate, but at that very moment, unbelievably, it opens. No one could understand what was happening, and the kid just shuts the gate at once, thinking that for unknown reasons, in his past life, he easily passed through the first gate. He did the same with the second, and even opened the third gate, which was a feat not even swordmasters had achieved. Thus, he reached the unknown space beyond the third gate, and back then he wasn't anyone special, just an ordinary captain of the Imperial Guard. Because of that, he ended up meeting an interesting individual, and upon entering the place he says it's been a long time, calling that sword Ensir. Out of nowhere, that thing starts talking, asking if he isn't the captain of the guard, and Asher says it's already been 40 years. This sword is the one he met and spoke with in his past life, and it is basically a being that can read the human soul. It can probably answer his questions, and then the sword asks what kind of appearance that is, since he suddenly became younger. The protagonist says his soul is the same, but he was reincarnated in the body of another person named Asher, and for that reason he came looking for it, hoping to find the reason behind his reincarnation. Accepting to help the boy, the sword asks to take a closer look at his soul. Suddenly some crazy lights start coming out, and the sword says it's very strange, because it can feel a sinister energy coming from his soul. Basically, there are traces of interference from a being with evil power in your soul, boy, and I can already tell this won't end well. In the middle of that situation, our boy assumes it could be Marwena. Basically, he is the leader of the Assassin Guild Motorola, and the most evil being of all. Right after that, the sword seems to understand what had happened, saying that gods can interfere with the souls of humans and he probably tried to steal yours. He became a master swordsman before dying in his past life, and those who reach the level of experience of a master swordsman make their aura and soul become one. But he died before achieving that, and his soul did not merge with his aura. So to Marunia, he has the soul of a master swordsman, but cannot use aura, making him an easy and highly desirable target. Hearing that, Asher says that just because his body changed, doesn't mean he'll be easily defeated by those guys. But at least that satisfied his curiosity, thinking that he has to meet that person in person. With everything settled, our boy says he's leaving, and the sword is surprised it was so quick, and Asher says that unfortunately he's very busy. He'll visit it before returning to the Empire, but the sword just asks to be pulled out of there. It's almost going crazy because it's been stuck there for decades, and Asher asks if it didn't say the same thing in the past. It had tried to be pulled out of there several times, but always ended up failing, and the sword says that now it's different, since he has become a master swordsman. With that, it ends up convincing the protagonist, who thinks he feels that the sword is lighter, very different from before. At that very moment, a glow surrounds the area, and so the sword is finally removed. A huge light envelops the whole place, and then the scene returns to the dormitories. Reika asks what Asher has been doing until now. He replies that it's nothing, even though he's completely dirty. In any case, he wanted to know what had happened at the academy, and the girl happily says that she passed. The professor seemed to be very strong, but even so, she ended up taking him down with a single blow. Honestly, it wasn't as difficult as she thought. And then Kamin says that there are many talented people in the county of Iraq. With everything settled, the girl says she's going to sleep, and everyone leaves. Looking at the guard, someone says he's been there for a while, but no one seems to have noticed him. Asher states that it's because he's invisible, except to him, and man, the sword turned into a spirit. A short time later, Asher asks the spirit if it's his first time seeing the human world, and he says he remembers seeing it before being sealed in the sword gate. In any case, the gate was completely destroyed, but he's happy they managed to get out safely. Asher says that because of that he's completely dirty, and the spirit says that at least he's fine and now finally free. Besides, before he forgets, he had felt something unpleasant. Asher says he's not wrong mentioning that beneath the Empire there is a portal that leads to the demon world. Recently, the one who protects the portal disappeared, and as a result, the barrier around it grew weaker and demonic energy began to seep into the human world. That person is a secret hero who protects the Empire, and honestly, he wanted to know where he went. But the spirit says that it's not only demonic energy he's sensing, because it's black magic and a force that could destroy this world. The scene then shifts to the castle's underground, and Arena says that the demonic energy is getting stronger and stronger, ordering them to stay alert. At that very moment, a guard is knocked out, and everyone was trying to understand what was happening. To make matters worse, a demon comes out of the portal, asking if they came for a stroll in the demon world. Returning to where Asher was, the protagonist asks if he said he had sensed the presence of black magic, and the spirit says that it's the power demons possess. Black magic is the evil force of the world's darkness, capable of bringing destruction, and someone is using that kind of thing to expand the portal and spread demonic energy. Hearing that right away, Asher thinks that if that's the case, the underground has already been overrun by demons. At that very moment, the two hear a voice, and it was Garen saying that he needs to see his master. At the same time, Asher appears at the scene asking what was happening, and the child asks him to help, because his master simply vanished. Then the protagonist explains that that boy is the successor of the Lord of the Abyss, asking if the captain of the guard was protecting that entrance, and asking him to let the two of them in. However, the young man insists that they must not do that, because only those who have trained can withstand the demonic energy. but the spirit says that he has already reached that level of training, so everything will be fine. A little while later, the scene shifts to that goblin from before, who asks if he came looking for him, and then Asher says that if he helps with this task, he'll ask the Empire to set him free. However, he has to promise never to hurt humans again, and Tarkin says that he is a warrior and swears by his honor and loyalty. Our boy then gives a smile asking for the goblin to be freed immediately. The guard thinks he can't do that without the captain's approval, but the Lord is the apprentice of the Empire's master swordsman, so in this situation, Asher is the only one they could trust. With that, Tarkin is freed, and he says that this must be the entrance to the underground and it certainly reeks of demonic energy. While they are entering the place, Garam asks if Asher is okay, because the influence of the demonic energy is getting stronger and it must be hard to endure. The boy says that he's fine, and the goblin states that it's only to be expected of the true swordsman, since a normal human would already be insane from this level of exposure. At that very moment, the monster notices something, asking if that on the ground isn't the elf woman. Without wasting time, our boy goes to help, asking if Arina is okay, realizing that fortunately, she wasn't seriously injured. In the middle of that situation, the girl asks what Asher was doing there, and to make matters worse, with that goblin, Asher says that he is familiar with demonic energy, so he will be of great help, and in any case, they are going in together. A little later, continuing to walk, the goblin says that there are demons nearby. Honestly, it's a familiar energy, similar to the brainwashing that had controlled him before. At that very moment, Asher says he heard something, and without wasting any time, he immediately equips his weapons. Right then, someone lets out a laugh, and then finally a demon appears. The girl asks what that thing in front of her was and whether they wanted to play with her again. Either way, all of them are going to end up dead with a single blow, and then she charges toward the protagonist. Everyone could hear the noise from far away, and Garam wonders if something had happened to his master. Either way, he needed to check in person, and Arina says she'll go too. Then the scene shifts to another place, with an old man noticing that Garam is approaching, asking him to hurry up so they can begin the succession ritual. Returning to the other battle, the protagonist defends himself, but at that very moment the demon disappears. Yet unbelievably, that thing was defeated with just a single blow. Asher asks who this idiot is, and Tarkin says she's a lower-class demon. She's not even worth fighting, and Asher asks who gave her the orders to come there. She replies that she just saw the portal and came by out of curiosity. At that very moment, Arina and Garam appear at the scene, and the demon, noticing the opportunity, summons another monster right beside her. The goblin says this is a pain, and right after that, Asher is thrown against the wall. The demon was already laughing smugly, thinking she had already won the battle, claiming that monsters are slaves to demons, and should obviously obey her. To make it easy to understand, they just have to kill those two so they can go destroy the human world together. Hearing that, of course, Tarkin was going to be furious, asking if she really thought she could use him with such insignificant power. In a matter of seconds, he lunges at the demon, throwing her aside with ease. At that very moment, an explosion occurs, and then that thing is thrown back into the portal. Arina asks if Asher is okay, and the spirit says he pretended to pass out just so he wouldn't have to fight, thinking he probably wanted to see whether that goblin would act against the demon or not. Right after that, Asher says he really hadn't joined the demons, and Tarkin says he told him he is a warrior, and because of that, he keeps his word. Besides that, he also hates that race. And a little later, the whole group arrives near a door. Arina says that this is the underground fortress where the portal is located, and Asher says that since they dealt with the demons, they'll try to find Krokos. After that, Garam opens the door, and then he comes face to face with his master, desperate. He asks what happened, because he thought he had disappeared, but then the old man apologizes for worrying him, saying he's completely fine. Asher watches everything from afar, thinking it's been a long time since he last saw him. Next, Crocus notices that the captain of the guard came too, and the girl says she's glad he was okay. However, the goblin, seeing that situation, thinks there's something not right. Arena says they came to ask for his help, because the Empire is in danger due to the waves of demons coming out of the portal, and kneeling down, she begs to be allowed to protect the Empire from the demons. The old man grows deeply thoughtful, and then, unbelievably, he refuses the offer, saying that he lived his entire life as the master of the abyss, asking how much longer he has to remain bound to that responsibility, and especially trapped in this damned underground prison. Damn, things are getting intense. At that moment, a flashback appears with a man thanking Asher, who asks if he is finally going underground, and whether it won't be hard to live there for the rest of his life. But the man says that for the Empire, someone has to do it. He says having the pride to face his parents who were killed by demons already brings him joy. And returning to the present, our boy thinks he had really sunk too low. Changing the subject, he asks the spirit what those things were, who says they are creatures that exist on the border between the demon realm and the human realm, and are primordial beings that are the source of demons' power and bodies. In addition, that so-called hero of the depths absorb demonic forms and gain the power of black magic. The old man then orders the demons to spread out, and one of them ends up heading toward Arena. However, Tarkin protects the girl, telling her not to get distracted and to raise her sword already. That man is no longer a hero, and is nothing but a monster. Right after that, the goblin calls out to the protagonist, saying he should leave this to him and the elf, and that he should go find that child. She and the old man had simply disappeared. Then the scene shifts to another place, with the Master of the Depths saying that he is going to begin the succession ceremony. The boy asks why he's doing this, and then the old man says he's very tired. He has been trapped underground for a long time, and the position of ruler of the depths means being forever bound to the darkness. And honestly, he didn't want to pass that miserable life on to him. However, Garen asks why he calls this job miserable, because he decided to become his successor because he respected him. The old man says he understands his point. After all, the Empire also calls him a hero and says it respects him. However, the truth is that they despise them for spreading demonic energy. Basically, it's a life worse than that of a criminal hidden behind the title of a hero, questioning what the way to escape this prison was, which obviously is turning this world into a prison. Meanwhile, Arena was fighting against the demons, and the goblin watches everything from afar. He thinks the girl is impressive and is strangely similar to true swordsmanship. The scene then returns to the protagonist, who was looking at a black circle, realizing it was a magical barrier. He asks if he could break that barrier, and the spirit says he is a swordmaster capable of resisting even waves from the demon realm, and if it's him, then it's definitely possible. The boy says he will try. Then the scene changes to the Master of the Depths, saying he will infuse Garen with his power. The boy says he doesn't want to do that, but even so, the old man continues. At that very moment, Asher finally manages to break the barrier, saying that this is not going to happen. The old man didn't understand what was happening, asking who he was. At that, the boy is released, and Asher says he thought he was a hero, but in truth he is worse than a demon. Hearing that, of course the man was going to get angry, telling him not to meddle where he wasn't invited. Our boy defends against every blow, and then he leaps, heading toward the old man. And in the middle of that situation, he thinks the Master of the Depths is truly pathetic. Meanwhile, the old man can't believe Asher broke his black magic, mentioning that he is no ordinary swordsman, and Asher says he can't just stand by while he turns the world into a nest of demons. However, the man, already furious, says he is no one to challenge the great hero Crocus. He cannot overcome the great power of black magic, claiming that he fully restored his body with black magic. And then the protagonist says he is not a hero, but rather just a traitor who sold humans out to the demons, but the guy just tells him to shut up, launching his black magic toward our hero, saying that the power of darkness destroys the mind and drives a person insane. No matter how strong he is still just a mere human, and definitely won't withstand the wave. However, the opposite happens, and incredibly enough, our boy manages to counterattack by nullifying the magic, saying that, unfortunately, that kind of thing doesn't work on him. A mental attack like that won't shake a swordmaster, and having no other choice, the old man says he will crush him with brute force. Asher was already in his defensive stance, and then the old man unleashes his sequence of attacks. The protagonist keeps defending, and at that same instant, an explosion happens. Our boy disappears, and the old man, approaching Garen, apologizes for showing him such a different side of himself and says he hoped he would understand. In the past, he lived his entire life with hatred and resentment toward the demons, and with a determination focused on protecting the world, he chose to become the agent of the depths. He had endured a long and lonely life underground, and it was all for the peace of the Empire. However, the Empire simply erased his existence, saying that the rift must not be known by the Empire. On top of that, they said he was a dangerous being, contaminated by the air of the demon realm. And despite the decades of prosperity because of him, they still treated him the same way as the demons. Because of that, he made a decision. There was no longer any reason to keep waiting on this rift, so he will annihilate these humans who are worse than the demons. That was why he obtained black magic, saying that he cannot pass this miserable life on to Garen, because with this power he hoped Garen could live a free life, without restrictions. But then our boy appears again, saying he can't accept this, and the old man is surprised that he is still alive. The protagonist stares Crocus down, saying that he said he wanted to be a son his parents could be proud of, and that someone had to do what needed to be done. Crocus asks how he knows that, and Asher says he abandoned the conviction he chose for himself, asking if he really submitted to mere demons. In truth, the Empire did not abandon him, and they trusted him and recognized him as a true hero, asking him to snap out of these delusions already and go back to being who he was before, a hero who was stronger than anyone, asking him to return to his roots. However, the old man ends up disappearing, and a huge eye appears, saying that in the end it was him, that guy who never changes. Asher asks what that thing is, and it replies that it is basically the master of black magic, and then the protagonist asks if it was the one who turned Crocus into this thing. It replies that it did absolutely nothing, and simply granted him a small request. Basically, he wanted the power of black magic, so it gave him a little but. Since he wants it to set him free, it will do that. Honestly, it was planning to play with the old man before killing him, but either way, it's fine. Our boy, consumed by rage, charges toward the eye, but when he attacks it, he ends up hitting Crocus, who says that dying at the hands of a comrade is better than dying by its hands. The two remain there staring at each other, and the old man thanks the protagonist, saying that he had freed him. At last he can die in peace, and hearing that, our boy remains silent. Crocus says that before dying he would like to know his name, and Asher says it's been a very long time, calling the old man captain of the guard of the territory of Iraq. At that moment he is surprised and asks how the boy knows that. Asher says he is his superior, and although not in the way he remembers, he is the captain of the guard. The scene returns to the goblin leader, who was looking at a portal. He realizes that the rift is shrinking, and at that very moment, the protagonist appears there. Arena asks what happened to Crocus. However, Asher does not say a single word. A little later, the two were looking at a gravestone, and Arena says that although his mind was twisted by the demons, Lord Crocus's achievements in protecting the Empire must not be forgotten. They are going to build a monument in his honor. And changing the subject, she asked them to go somewhere else, because Garam wanted to meet the protagonist. A few minutes later, the kid was already all decked out, and now the Master of the Depths appeared. Asher says that he has now become the successor, and the boy thanks them for coming there. That grave in front of them is his master's tomb, and Asher apologizes for everything, but the young man says it is not his fault. The master tried to use the power of the demon realm to destroy the world, and surely that was not the person he had known. Instead, he is grateful that he helped him recover his mind. Soon after, a flashback appears with Crocus, saying that he thought he recognized that sword skill, and he was definitely right, and Asher asks how someone like him ended up that way. He replies that the demons took advantage of him in a moment of weakness and twisted his heart, and that he guessed he was just a weak human after all. Honestly, I wanted to be strong like the captain. And at that very moment, Garam appears, and then the old man apologizes for everything. Anyway, they are going to begin the succession ceremony, even if it is late. Even the reluctant Garan accepts, and with a smile on his face, the old man says it was good to meet the protagonist. Before anything else, he wanted to speak only with his disciple, asking to be left alone with him. Asher agrees to everything and says he hoped they would meet once again someday. Returning to the present, our boy was deep in thought, and Garan says that even so, it is not easy to overcome those feelings. The kid was really feeling awful, and at that very moment, a demon appears. Completely casually, she says she brought some of the master's study books, and she is immediately surprised to see that Arena and the protagonist were there too. Arena was almost drawing her sword, but the little boy says there is no need to worry, because that demon has now decided to work as his assistant. She says that when the rift closed, she had nowhere else to go and had to hide, but incredibly enough, her master did not kill her, and simply took her in. Honestly, she was treated badly in the demon realm, so staying like this with her master is much better. Our boy just watches the conversation, and then Garam tells them to take care. And with everything settled, a little later, they leave the lower part of the castle, and Arena asks if it is not dangerous to make a demon his assistant, and Asher says that even though she has done some things, she does not have the strength or malice to hurt people. Besides, having someone accompany Garan will help him escape loneliness, and on that point, he has a point. At that very moment, Cain appears with a bunch of soldiers saying that he came there to escort the protagonist. Suddenly, they kneel down, asking the boy to accompany them, because the Great Emperor wished to meet him personally. A little later, Asher was already greeting the Great Emperor. The man asks him to raise his head, saying that he holds his achievements in high regard. Apparently, he is the only person he can trust now. After all, the so-called heroes are falling and disappearing one by one. In any case, he must reward him for saving the Empire, and as a sign of his gratitude and trust, he will grant him this reward. A bunch of guards begin bringing in a box, and the king says that he seems like the perfect person to possess this item. Asher was curious to know what it was, and after opening the box, the scene changes to a short time later. The spirit asks what exactly the Emperor gave him, and Asher says it was the Empire's box, basically a rare weapon passed down from the ancient Emperor, and he had heard rumors about it, but this was the first time he had discovered this kind of thing. The spirit is surprised that the king handed him something so valuable. Soon after, Reka and Cain appear, saying that it is incredible that Asher managed to meet someone that almost no one could approach, and our boy, meanwhile, thinks that the time had finally come. And calling Reka, he says that he has something to tell her. A short time later, the girl says that he is leaving so suddenly. Wow, he accepted it that easily. Our boy says he does not know when he will see her again, so he asks her to focus on her studies. After all, there is something he needs to do, thinking that he is going to take care of everything that annoys him. Soon after, the girl leans on our hero's shoulder, asking him not to die wherever he goes. He looks at his companions, thinking that it was good to have met Arena, thanking her for everything so far. With everything settled, he leaves the castle, and Reka says that nothing bad will happen. He is very strong and obviously will survive wherever he goes. At the same time, a flashback appears with the protagonist saying that he will be a little late, asking them to lock the doors and take good care of the house. Arena thinks that the image of her father going to the battlefield as if it were nothing. They've kept coming back to your mind since that fateful day. Shortly after, the spirit asks where they're going, and Asher says they're heading to the kingdom of Arabia. Basically, it's a place ruled by his old friend. According to the information, apparently the kingdom has fallen, and right after that, Tarkin appears. Asher says it looks like he's free now, and the goblin says that fortunately he kept his promise. That's why he'll definitely remember the boy, and they'll surely meet once again to fight again. When that happens, he'll definitely defeat him, and Asher says he'll be ready. The two share one last stare, and then the goblin leader starts running into the forest. The spirit says that monsters are also enemies of humans, asking if it's really okay to let him go like that. But the protagonist says he had promised not to hurt humans, and since he's a warrior, he'll definitely keep his word. Our hero walks through the forest, and meanwhile Kairos watches from above, thinking that he's definitely a mysterious boy, and he had been investigating his past, and he is the adopted son of the Lord of Arak, and he used to be a troublemaker, causing all kinds of problems. But suddenly he became a swordmaster overnight, and he was even acknowledged as a disciple by a swordmaster. He had achieved great feats in a short period of time, and it's very hard to believe, wondering if it's possible for someone to change that much. Anyway, he's been suspicious of him ever since they started working together. To be honest, he had always been curious about his true identity until he found some very interesting information, wondering who the protagonist really is. Man, the pieces are starting to fall into place for Kairos. A few minutes later, the spirit asks what kind of place the kingdom of Gravia is. Asher says it's a kingdom ruled by a great mage and a hero who protected the world with his transcendental magic. After the war, he received land from the emperor and founded that place. It was brighter and more splendid than any other place, basically called paradise on earth. But he heard that the kingdom fell and the great mage simply disappeared. The spirit asks if he fell like the ruler of the abyss, and the MC says they can't say for sure about that right now. Meanwhile, some hooded figures were watching everything from afar, and Asher says they should go there and see for themselves to find out. At that very moment, the bandits appear, but our boy was already on guard, and then he immediately counterattacks, realizing it was the Guild of Motorola, and just as he had said before, followers of the goddess Marunia. At that very moment, someone says that, as expected, they are not easy prey, calling the boy the Imperial Sword Brat, telling him to give up and offer his life to the goddess, and Asher says he was already planning to track down that false god of theirs anyway, ordering them to take him to where she is. And hearing that, of course, the bandits were furious, charging toward the young man. He does the same, taking down a considerable number of their group. Even so, they don't give up. And a little later, Asher calls out to one of the group members, saying that if they don't want to get hurt anymore, they should bring Marunia there. However, the guy says that's pretty unlikely to happen, because before that happens, he'll die by his hands. Looking at the situation, Asher thinks that he finally revealed himself, mentioning that his sword skills are far more refined than before. This is the guy who attacked our hero in the past, and he confidently says he's going to finish him off. At the same time, a huge explosion happens, and then someone says they're blocking the way. The one there was Hyvan, who is surprised that Asher is there. Then he immediately realizes that was the Motorola group attacking the boy. Anyway, those assassins dared to lay a hand on his disciple, and at that very moment, Asher asks him to wait a bit, saying that if the assassin doesn't want to die, he should quickly say where their base is. With all the mess settled, Hyban says it's been a long time, but even so, Asher hasn't changed at all. Changing the subject, he asks if Reika is doing well, and he answers yes, since she even enrolled in the academy. By coincidence, he's heading to the Empire too, so maybe he would visit the girl, assuming that if he brought Marunia's head, the Emperor would be pleased. And then the spirit asks if this man really is a swordmaster. He definitely knows this aura, and right after that, the two stand before a gate. Hyban is surprised that they really have a base near this forest, but anyway, they're going to wipe them all out in one go. However, at that same moment, another person appears, welcoming them to the sanctuary of Motorola. In the middle of that situation, Asher seems to recognize that girl, thinking that she's still alive. She then descends to the ground, saying that it's been a long time since she last saw Hyban. Removing her hood, the woman asks if he doesn't remember her face, mentioning that thanks to the gods she obtained an immortal body that surpasses even a swordmaster, asking if he thought she would die like the captain of the guard. Meanwhile, Asher thinks that there is a group of Motorola guided by divine revelation. In the past, Hyban and he received orders from the Empire to carry out a large-scale operation to wipe out this guild, and after long battles they defeated all the members except for one called Shevanath. Somehow she managed to survive, and when cornered, she found a way to disappear without leaving a single trace. Even so, he was surprised that she showed up right now, and then the girl says it has nothing to do with him but rather with his disciple. Asher, without wasting any time, raises his sword, but then Hyban stops him, saying that he'll deal with her personally. After all, this has to be settled once and for all, and at that very moment the two swords collide. Shivanath asks if he really wants to fight her, and Hyban says that he'll exterminate her entire guild. The fight continues, rolling around, and Asher thinks it's surprising that the woman can defend against a sword charged with aura. Right after that, she says he shouldn't underestimate divine power because they are mere ignorants who do not believe in the gods, asking if he thinks he could surpass the power of the great divinity. Their swords clash once again, and Hyban, all chill, says that she's way too fanatical. At that moment, the guy activates his cheats and sends the poor girl flying, telling her not to underestimate him, mentioning that all she did was keep running away, and now she dares challenge him while relying on her god's power, asking if she thinks a swordmaster is a joke. However, the girl says that his age of heroes had already ended, and casting a spell says that they will kneel before the power of the divine. Man, nothing good is coming from that, and Hyban asks what she was trying to do. At the same time, the man feels something, realizing that he couldn't breathe. The spirit says that this is divine power suppressing superhuman strength, and incredibly enough, it was also affecting the protagonist. The girl there was already completely convinced, saying that inferior beings were daring to defy the great god. Then she kicks Hyban, sending the poor guy flying away. She also approaches Asher, telling him to consider himself blessed for being able to join her group. Either way, it will end painlessly. And then, our boy tries to say something. She approaches Asher to hear what it was, and taking advantage of the opportunity, Asher says that she let her guard down. And then, my friend, that was all he needed to finish the fight. The girl falls to the ground injured, and Asher says he doesn't know how she managed to overpower Lord Hyban with her power, but apparently, unfortunately for her, it doesn't work on him. The woman gets up, saying not to think he had already won, mentioning that the boy was marked by the divine. He will be tormented until his last breath, and the will of the great divine will always stand in his way. Then, Asher draws his spear, and the fight finally ends. The boy says that doesn't make any difference, thinking that they toyed with his fate and recklessly harmed those around him. Obviously, they're going to pay dearly for it, and suddenly Haiban regains consciousness. The man says it's truly humiliating to be defeated by such a miserable attack, and Asher tells him to get some rest. Out of nowhere, someone says that the protagonist made it far and is a human with the soul of a swordmaster. Asher wanted to know where that voice was coming from, and then he says that he'll enter the sanctuary first. There could still be assassins in the area, and without wasting any time, he starts running. The spirit asks if something is happening, and Asher says it seems he couldn't hear it either. What he had just heard was the voice of the goddess Morowina, and when he got there were more of the hooded ones. They charge at the boy, who then summons an axe, taking all of them out. Continuing forward, the spirit says he senses movement further ahead, and shortly after they approach a door, Asher forces it open, and then he ends up finding someone sitting on a throne. The old man says that he made it very far, and Asher is surprised that he's still alive. His name is Bakrosa, and he's basically the leader of everything. However, he's sure that he had killed him back then. The leader, however, says that this is only a borrowed body, but he is still Morowina. Wow, so it's actually a man. Asher says that they finally met, but that doesn't matter because they're settling things now. However, the guy asks him to wait because he has no intention of fighting him, because he lost all his power and is completely ruined. The only thing he did was place his power in his followers to capture him, but it all ended in failure. As a result, he's in this state, barely sustaining himself in a borrowed body. And hearing that, Asher asks if he was the one who reincarnated him, but he quickly says that he didn't do that, and the only thing he managed was to identify the nature of his soul. In addition, he tried to steal it, because a human soul that reached the realm of a swordmaster could save the gods. And then Morania tells him to be careful from now on, because he's not the only one after his soul. The scene shifts to another place, and Arania was dealing with a pile of documents. But even so, she wanted to know if Asher was okay, and at that very moment, Kami appears in the room saying that the Knights of the Sun God are there. On the other side of the castle, a carriage was stopped, and then a girl gets out of it. She seems to be a mage who says that the one the Sun God is looking for is probably in that place. A few minutes later, that girl says it's been a long time since she's seen Arena, who asks what the priestess of the sun named Bercia was doing there. This is the most powerful religion in the empire, and the saint known as the divine reincarnation with the power granted by the Sun God leads the Order of the Sun God, which is the church's own army. However, it is known for its aggressive evangelism and is considered a very arrogant religious group. Right after that, the girl says she heard a rumor that a few days ago the empire was almost attacked by demons, and that a certain swordsman named Asher prevented that whole disaster, asking where he is now. The scene then returns to the protagonist, and the god says that gods are incomplete beings. Each one sustains their existence and gains power through human faith, and when humans lose faith, the gods lose their power and end up disappearing. But since he has the soul of a swordmaster, he could free the gods from their dependence on humans, thus becoming self-sufficient and obtaining omnipotent power along with eternal life, basically becoming completely detached from humans, asking how any god could not desire that. Hearing that, Asher says it is pure arrogance, because he depends on humans and still wants to rule over them. However, the man says he once led Motorola's loyal followers. He had given them his power to capture the protagonist, but they ended up failing and leaving him in this pitiful state. Then Asher says it was a fitting end for his arrogance, asking if they should put an end to this now. At that moment, the old man starts laughing, saying that he is quite eager for his final battle. At that very instant, the ground begins to shake, and then the place was about to collapse. The old man says he will recover his power through his soul, asking Asher to offer his life to the great Marinia. At the same time, the old man is struck by an attack, and Asher was trying to understand what was happening. The one who had appeared there was Haiban, who tells them to get out of there quickly. Then the man activates his aura, and they easily get out from underground. The scene returns to the hall where the priestess was, and she asks them to hand over any information they had about the protagonist. Hearing that, Arena wonders why the woman wants to know Asher's whereabouts. Who knows what she might do afterward, and of course, she is not going to hand over the information, asking who she thinks she is to dare give orders against the Empire and to speak that way about a national hero, ordering her to leave the hall immediately. And hearing that, the priestess is shocked. But anyway, she agrees to do so. After all, they do not want to cause conflict with the Empire over this. She leaves the place, and Arena asks why they want to know where Asher is, and the girl says they do not know why either. After all, the only thing they are doing is simply following the Sun God's orders, but they have to keep in mind that they will find Asher somehow, because the Sun God's orders are absolute, and so everyone leaves the room. A few minutes later, Arena wonders why the Sun God is after Asher. Thus, some more time passes, and Reika was studying, saying that the Academy's studies are not easy. Before, she thought she only needed to focus on the art of the sword, but there are a lot of subjects to deal with, asking why she has to study these things. And would you look at that, the protagonist was in the book too. At that very moment, someone knocks on the door saying that Arena was calling for her. Reika thinks it is very strange. After all, it is her first time having a private meeting with Arena. The girl says there is a reason why she called her there, because she wanted to know more about Asher, thinking that the Sun God is a being who can see into anyone's soul, which means he probably saw something in our boy. It would be useful if she could share some information. And Reika agrees but still wants to know why she is so curious. At that very moment, someone appears in the room, and Arena asks who it was. The one there was Kairos, who says he is just an agent of the information network, asking if she has probably heard of them. Before, the secret intelligence group had been hired by Boros, but now, at present, they are serving Asher. Hearing that, Rekka is surprised, and Kairos says that Asher had told him to find the hero's whereabouts, and had given a very strange order. Besides that, he also became curious about the protagonist, asking her to continue what she was saying. Thus the scene shifts elsewhere, with Asher saying that he had seen Haiban's aura, and honestly, he even started to doubt whether that was the true swordmaster. Besides that, he had said something before, because it was as if he doubted his own strength. Haiban had always firmly believed in his own talent, and thanks to that, he was able to become a swordmaster, but now for some reason he seems to have lost that confidence. He said something similar yesterday too, mentioning that the doubts he had for a long time are slowly starting to clear up, and honestly, I am starting to doubt whether this current self of yours is really at its peak. Our boy keeps listening to what the man was saying, and then he says he is just a weak human. If it were not for his help, he would have been crushed and killed down there, stating that true mastery of the sword consists of surpassing human limits, and he protected the world and saved countless lives with that power, asking if that is not already proof enough that he achieved true mastery of the sword. After that, Haiban thanks him for everything, and returning to the present, Asher says he still had that dejected expression. The spirit says the guy is right, because wielding the sword means mastering oneself, but your power is closer to something unknown. It even seems like something interfered, creating an artificial force. The fact that he was affected by the god's energy proves that his power is unstable, and it doesn't seem like he attained that power through long training like you did. Asher says that at this moment he still hasn't reached that level, and is just an ordinary person who only knows how to use imperial sword techniques, thinking that, if only he could recover his power, he might be able to surpass this body's limits. At that very moment, that priestess from before appears. The scene then shifts back to the castle once again, and Kairos asks if she analyzed the goblin's characteristics and prepared countermeasures. Rika says yes, but not even the elders knew that information. To sum it up, it's as if the protagonist had experienced wars from the past. Kairos asks what Arena was thinking about, and she replies that it was nothing. But the guy insists she tell him, asking why she's suddenly curious about the protagonist's whereabouts. She says that actually the sun god is pursuing him, and because of that they need to find out why. The scene returns to our boy who had finally met up with that priestess. Man, I can already tell this isn't going to end well, huh? The protagonist wonders who that woman was, and judging by her appearance, she must be a priestess of the Order of the Sun God. He knows his stuff. Anyway, he wants to know why she's there. Out of nowhere, the girl drops her staff, and taking the boy's hand, she asks if he could help her. Asher was trying to understand what was going on there, and a few minutes later the girl explains everything, and Asher asks if she's saying that a nearby village was attacked and the residents were captured. She says that dozens of farmers are about to be sold to traffickers, and that's why she needs his help. Looking at the situation, Asher already has a rough idea of who it might be, saying that she seems to be a priestess of the Order of the Sun God, asking whether it wouldn't be better to ask the knights of her order for help. They say that since their order is the Empire's largest religious group, it also has great military strength. But hearing that, the girl falls silent, saying that they are dealing with other matters and do not follow her orders, and with no other choice, the boy decides that he will help her. Thinking that he should take this opportunity to wipe out that damned group, he asks her to take him to where the traffickers are. At that, the girl stands up, saying she had forgotten to introduce herself, mentioning that her name is Verkia. A little later, Asher thinks he has heard that the Order of the Sun God is an oppressive religion. But surprisingly, that girl is very humble. Soon after, they finally find the place, and Asher thinks they are not the same bandits he had encountered before. Anyway, it's better to deal with this as quickly as possible. He calls out to the girl, saying he has a favor to ask. Meanwhile, the guards continued their patrol. Suddenly, one of them looks to the side, coming face to face with our hero, saying he's just a brat. The guards confront Asher, asking if he even knows where he is, and at that very moment, the protagonist raises his sword, taking out everyone in front of him all at once. A huge explosion happens in the middle of it all, and the spirit says that was incredible, asking if he has recovered his aura yet, and Asher says it's not aura, but the divine power of the priestess of the sun god. The priestess herself has no offensive abilities, but she has the power to heal wounds. Besides that, she can also temporarily maximize a person's strength. With that, for a short period of time, he can wield power equivalent to that of a master swordsman. What is this? That's insane. Soon after, Verkia says she knew her eyes weren't deceiving her, but even so, she didn't expect him to be so powerful. The boy says it's all thanks to her help, and a few minutes later, the scene moves inside a cave. Asher says this doesn't seem like just any underground prison, and she says it looks more like the temple of a religious sect. At that very moment, a shadow appears, asking who dared cause a disturbance in this sacred sanctuary. The man finally reveals himself, and the protagonist, drawing his sword, says it would be better to release the villagers immediately. However, the masked man says they were the saviors with the power of the great god. Basically, they are going to free the people and make them the true saviors of this world. What a crazy thing to say. Next, Verkia says she doesn't know which order they belong to, but attacking innocent villages is unforgivable. They are nothing more than mere bandits. And hearing that, the masked man asks whether her Order of the Sun God really has the right to criticize them. After all, they are a fanatical group that destroyed countless ordinary citizens under the label of heretics. But that won't matter anymore, because the era of the outdated gods has finally come to an end. At that very moment, a bunch of torches are lit, and the masked man says that soon the new god will descend upon this world. Man, a bunch of people were piled on top of each other, and the masked man says the true savior is about to arrive. The two of them are horrified by the sight before their eyes, and Asher can't believe his group was doing this to people. It really is an extremely cruel act. And hearing that, the masked man just laughs, saying that, for the salvation of many, the sacrifice of a few is unfortunately inevitable. This will be a reward for the gods, for they must be honored. At that very moment, an enormous darkness appears in the sky, and the priestess notices something, saying that the altar's energy is penetrating the man's body. And without moving a single muscle, Asher thinks that all of this was done to summon this thing. The aberrations are monsters from another dimension that are neither divine nor demonic. They are completely hostile to human beings, and possess transcendental power capable of destroying an entire city. In the past, a person who worshipped the power of the aberrations tried to use forbidden magic to summon them with the intention of bringing about humanity's downfall. And as a result, Oriana's homeland, the Dark Elf Forest, was completely annihilated. Then the huge monster fully transforms, and the spirit says they have to stop this before its true form descends into this world. At this moment, that man has only absorbed a small part of the power, and Asher thinks that when he fought an aberration, even if it was in the past, it took at least 2 master swordsmen just to hold it back, wondering if at this moment he could face an aberration alone. The man grew at least 3 meters, saying that the time of judgment had come. He prepares his attack, however, it has no effect because the priestess defended against it. At least the poor girl is useful for something, and then she says she'll try to hold it back somehow. But Asher meanwhile thinks it's going to be pretty difficult, and she probably won't withstand the aberration's power with just a barrier. And sure enough, my friend, the barrier is simply shattered in a matter of seconds. The girl is shocked by what had happened, and the protagonist, without wasting any time, grabs her to dodge the attack, thinking that at this rate, they definitely won't have a single chance of winning. If that's the case, there's no choice but to use divine power, once again asking the girl to bless his weapon. He is going to charge straight in and strike its vital point. However, the girl says it's too dangerous. Even so, our hero was determined to do it, asking her to lend him her strength one more time. And with no other choice, the girl does what Asher had asked. Without wasting any time, he grabs his enhanced weapon, charging at that shadow. He manages to drive the weapon into the monster's chest. However, the darkness was very powerful. He couldn't let go of his weapon, almost being devoured by that cursed darkness, but I don't know how. The kid somehow finds a way around it all, and then passes right through the monster. Incredibly enough, he managed to defeat it, and not even Asher could believe what he had done. With the battle over, the priestess begins to heal the boy, saying that it had finally come to an end. Asher thanks her for healing him, and the priestess says that she should be the one thanking him because he had saved everyone. All the villagers perished, but thanks to him they avoided an even greater disaster. In any case, they need to pray for the souls of the villagers, asking for everyone to rest in peace. Yeah, this girl is actually pretty nice. Then a day passes, and the priestess says she hadn't even asked what his name was, asking what he is called because he will be remembered forever as a hero of the Order of the Sun God. When Asher was about to say his name, he changes the subject, saying he'll tell her when they meet again, because he plans to visit the great church of the Sun God soon. Hearing that, the girl says she understands, so from today on she will remember his face very well. Then she hands the boy a necklace, stating that this is a sign of the Sun God and a reward she would give him. It will surely serve him well. And right after that, Asher thanks her for everything. A little later, the priestess had already left, and suddenly someone calls out to her. The man asks if she has a moment, and entering the tent, he kneels down, saying that he greets the great Saint Verkia. But she says there is no need for formalities, asking if he has already finished the work he carried out without her permission. With a smile on his face, the guy says yes, mentioning that the commoners swore their faith to the sun god, and that with this the church's influence grew much more. Hearing this, the saint asks what the point is of forcing conversion through violence, because surely many lives were lost in the process. However, the young man warns that she should not mourn the death of heretics, asking if she is by any chance feeling empathy for those inferior beings. In any case, what the saint currently lacks is resolve. The same thing happened in the Empire, because she failed to obtain any information about the protagonist after being intimidated by a mere captain of the guard. To sum it up, she should have forced a clear answer from the Empire, and the nervous girl asks if he wanted her to start a war. He can talk about battles all he wants because he will always be safe, but the only ones who ever die in war are innocent citizens. Then the commander says he understands that she worries about the people. After all, before being chosen by the gods, she was just an ordinary girl from a small village. With the conversation over, the annoying guy finally leaves, and the priestess thinks that she is the divine representative, but in truth she has no power of any kind. She was born and raised in a small rural village, and on an ordinary day she was chosen by the sun god and received that divine power. With that, she was able to rise to the position of priestess of the sun god. However, the knights of that group are nobles, and to them, serving a commoner is basically unacceptable. In the end, they completely ignored her, expanding their influence through violence. While doing so, they gave themselves over to their power games, dragging ordinary people into war to be sacrificed. In the middle of that situation, the girl even sheds a tear, wondering why God chose her, saying that if someone as reliable and courageous as the protagonist could lead the Knights of the Sun God, the story would be completely different. Then the scene shifts to our boy, and the spirit asks if he is really planning to go to the Church of the Sun God. But he says that Maruna had warned him to be careful. Other gods may be looking for him, and the Sun God may be one of them, so it is better not to get involved. A little later, Asher stands before a gate, saying that this is the entrance to the kingdom of Rabia. The spirit asks how they are going to enter a gate that is locked. Then Asher touches a stone and a secret passage opens, saying that this is a method a great mage once taught him. A powerful mage cast a barrier around the kingdom to protect its citizens, so entering without permission would not be easy. But his case is different because this method was secretly passed down only to trusted companions. The spirit says it is no wonder they call this place paradise. And at that very moment, someone attacks our boy, asking who was there. A hooded girl appears, and Asher keeps watching her, thinking that this girl is definitely very familiar. Then the girl says that this is a secret passage that only authorized individuals may enter, asking once again who the young man is. Right then, Asher remembers who she was, and at the same time, two more people appear at the scene. Everyone was staring at the protagonist, and then one of the soldiers recognizes Asher, saying that he is that guy whom he had seen in the Empire. Basically, they had met at the Gate of Swords. He easily opened the first gate and walked in like it was nothing. But there is still more to the story, because after he passed through, the Gate of Swords completely collapsed. Seeing the situation, the girl says that he definitely must be a demon. Everyone immediately raises their weapons to face the boy, and the spirit asks what they are going to do because the two are already ready to fight. And drawing his sword, he says there is no way to avoid it, and he will have to deal with them, right? Everyone is surprised by the skill Asher had just used, but without wasting time, they jump straight into the fight. Asher manages to block the blow, wondering if that guy was not the best at the academy. His stance is fairly decent, but even so, he is still nowhere near his disciple. Then the guy is thrown far away, and the hooded girl steps to the front of the fight. She charges at our hero, using some kind of water ability, asking where he got that gauntlet, and how he can use that spatial magic. The young man says it is a gift from his master, and his name is Hai-Ban. Right away, the girl backs off, saying that now that he had mentioned it, she had heard some rumors. Apparently, Hai-Ban had a disciple in some territory, so he must be the swordsman everyone talks so much about. Full of confidence, Asher says that is exactly right, and his master also taught him the way to this passage. To make it easier to understand, he came there to meet the Lord of the Kingdom of Rabia, who is a close friend of his master. With everything settled, the hooded girl says they were there investigating the cause of the fall of the Kingdom of Rabia. Introducing the guy beside her, she says his name is Poitan, and he is a swordsman from the Kingdom of Rygan. The other one is Reuben, and he is a historian. And lastly, her name is Badri, and she is a mage. Hearing that, Asher says that she must have learned that magic from someone, because he heard that the lord of this place had a disciple, and she was probably there to find her master. At that, Badri is surprised that he knows all that, stating that she is a student of the Lord of the Kingdom of Rabia. The spirit asks how he knew that, and Asher thinks that he saw this when he was just a child. The archmage raised a child as his adopted daughter to be his successor, and now that child has become a very beautiful young woman. Then she says that she stayed away from the Kingdom of Rabia for a long time and dreamed of a life of freedom outside the castle. Her master was like a father to her, but he was so strict that he only cared about magic, and they ended up arguing many times because of that. Because of that, one day she secretly left the kingdom, hiding her identity as a disciple, living a life among ordinary people. But then as time passed, she heard rumors that the kingdom had fallen, and by chance she met those people and decided to travel with them. Poitan asks why the kingdom suddenly fell, and the girl says she does not know. In any case, she intends to find her master and hear the story for herself. At that very moment, the group comes across a door, and she says that this is the entrance to the Kingdom of Rabia. Without wasting time, Asher says he will go first, because there may be monsters or demons there, telling them to stand guard. Thus, the boy finally opens the door, being surprised by what he saw. The city was completely normal, and Asher asks if this really is a fallen kingdom. They start walking around the place, and the girl says that the Kingdom of Rabia looks the same as always. However, Asher, in his thoughts, realizes that he was feeling a threatening presence. Then Poitan approaches a little stall, asking the man how much that fruit cost. However, when he looks at the old man, he didn't seem very friendly. The mage also tries to talk to the residents, asking if she has heard any rumors about the archmage, but Reuben says there's no point. To make it easier to understand, the people in that place literally no longer have their souls. And Asher, observing the situation, says that they are all already dead and are only repeating the actions they performed in life. This is practically a city of living corpses, and Poitan asks how that happened. But of course Asher had no idea, thinking that he had seen countless battlefields and destruction, but had never witnessed anything so bizarre. Then Reuben says that the archmage wanted to create the one true paradise on Earth, a world where magic would take care of everything humans needed. He wanted to build a kingdom where people could live comfortably, free from worries and hardships, but in the end they were consumed by magic. losing both their self-awareness and their lives. The mage says that her master only wanted to create a world similar to paradise, but they ended up falling into ruin in a horrifying way. Anyway, maybe this is the result of his arrogance in believing in the power of magic and challenging the authority of the gods. A little later, the group finally arrives at the palace. Badri says that this is where her master stays, and Ruben says the security there is very tight. But Poitan couldn't care less about that, saying they should just keep moving forward. At that very moment, a guard appears behind him. But then the mage manages to save him, saying that the guards detect intruders even though they are only empty bodies. Right now, those guards no longer recognize her as the Archmage's apprentice and only see them as enemies, so they attack naturally. Without wasting time, Asher attacks several soldiers at once, but incredibly, no matter how many times they knocked them down, they simply got back up and continued their work. If this keeps up, they'll be fighting there forever. And soon after, a barrier appears surrounding that army of soldiers. The one who did it was Asher, who, holding his staff, tells everyone to enter the castle now because he'll hold them off for the time being. At that, the spirit asks if that is the reward the Empire gave him. Basically, it's a rare weapon from the Imperial Vault that the Emperor gave him. In short, a staff that generates a barrier that was even used in war to restrict enemy movements. Even so, it's only a temporary spell and obviously won't last long, right? Everyone starts running into the castle without wasting time, and at that very moment, as usual, one of the idiots ends up falling. At the same time, unfortunately, the barrier breaks. And then, my friend, the guy already knew he was screwed. A few seconds later, everyone realizes that Ruben had been left outside, and by this point, the barrier has definitely already disappeared. Anyway, he's going to go rescue him. However, the boy appears there as if nothing had happened, apologizing for the delay. He managed to escape by the skin of his teeth, and man, I don't know how, but he did it, you know? Everyone keeps walking through the castle, but Ruben notices something strange about the protagonist, wondering why he's acting like that. Yeah, I can already tell this won't end well. And outside, all the other soldiers had been completely annihilated. Back inside the castle, Badri says that this is the central building where her master's office is. Most likely, he must be researching a way to restore the Empire, and at that very moment, smoke begins to envelop the place. The spirit asks if Asher is sensing anything, who immediately replies that it is the smell of something decomposing. Without wasting time, the girl starts running and passing through a door is shocked by what she sees. Unfortunately, her master had already passed away. Badri falls to her knees and with tears on her face asks who could have done such a thing. Everyone was just silently watching the situation, and at that very moment, the skeleton starts talking, telling Badri to shut up. No one understood what was happening, and the skeleton asks where the girl had been all this time to only come back now. Badri asks what is going on, and the skeleton says it's just an illusion. After all, he is an archmage, and a trick like that is nothing to him. Changing the subject, he says she must have already seen the ruins of the fallen kingdom on the way there. The residents she saw were also fakes placed there as decoys, and the real residents are already safe, living in an underground city. At that moment, the girl is happy that everyone is okay, and Poitan asks why the archmage made it look like the kingdom had been destroyed, and the man says it was because of the demons. A high-ranking demon has its eye on the kingdom of Rabia, and honestly, that is too much to deal with alone. So he staged the kingdom's fall to evacuate the citizens and buy time to find some way to solve it. But that doesn't matter now because he is happy that his daughter had returned, apologizing for having been so distant all this time. Besides that, she brought some friends, and looking at the protagonist, he asks if he wasn't Haiban's student. They must all be tired, so they can leave now, because he needs to have a long talk with the boy. With everything settled, the whole group leaves the room, and then the skeleton says that it has already been quite a long time, calling our hero captain of the guard, and Asher says that, as expected, he recognized him in a single second. The skeleton says that he may look different, but he can surely feel that his soul is the same. And then Asher asks what the hell happened to him. He replies that it is a curse tied to the power of heroes, and in the end, he destroyed his own kingdom with his own hands. In short, the kingdom of Rabia really did fall, and he had also now become an undead. He had basically lied to reassure his student, but in any case, he wanted to be a great lord, using magic to protect the kingdom and bring comfort to his people. However, the opposite happened, because that power ended up draining human souls and bringing the kingdom to total ruin. That was when he realized that the power of heroes, once used to save the world, is paradoxically a dangerous force that can also bring destruction. Hearing that, Asher says that Haiban also had his doubts, because he questioned the true nature of his power, and whether his skill with the sword was really the right path. The Archmage says that is exactly it, saying that he must have already witnessed the fate of the heroes of the past. Valbarka's mind was twisted and turned him into a demon. Besides that, the Master of the Depths sought the help of demons and tried to bring down the Empire, asking what he thinks would happen if the power of heroes were corrupted as well. Basically, they would have a catastrophe on a completely different scale from the Demon King's invasion, and that is why he sacrificed all his power and life to forge that sword, asking Asher to take it, mentioning that it is called Fenrir and that it has the ability to absorb the power of heroes. It is the only salvation that could bring the Age of Heroes to an end, and for that reason he has a request to make of the captain of the guard. To be more specific, he wants him to use this sword to put an end to his life. He is the only one he can trust to do that. And hearing that, our boy was trying to process everything. wondering if the Archmage wanted him to take the life of another dear friend with his own hands. Once again, the two of them stay there in silence, and having no other choice, our boy only apologizes. He drives the dagger into the Archmage, who is then finally freed. The boy realizes that the magical illusion was disappearing, and all of it was being absorbed by that blessed dagger. The old man finally returns to his original form, thanking the protagonist for doing that. He can finally rest in peace, and Asher asks if this is going to be goodbye. He replies that yes, tomorrow he will say goodbye to his student for the last time, disappearing completely along with his kingdom. In any case, this is the time to express his gratitude, and changing the subject, he asks if he had not reincarnated. He replies that it is almost that, and at first he thought it had been the god Marunia who had done it, but it does not seem that he was the direct cause. And hearing that, the Archmage says that he knows something that can help him, asking him to seek out the elves of the Red Forest in the far north. Those creatures belong to a different clan and are high elves who tend to look favorably on humans, and thus possess the sacred abilities to read and heal souls. Maybe they can help him find out what really happened. And hearing that, Asher asks if that is not the place where Ravania has her domain. The Archmage says that is exactly right, and that is why when he gets there he has to see whether the girl is well, because he heard that northern goblins almost invaded the Empire. But even so, our boy did not want to meet that woman, and the Archmage says that she is still his companion, and even though she is arrogant, she is quite admirable. She chose to live in that hostile land of her own free will just to protect humanity. Asher also has a good heart, and because of that he is sure that he and Ravania will be able to reconcile. A short time later, the little group from before was in the Archmage's room, happy that he had returned to his true form. Badri says that she could not find our boy, and her father says that he has already left. The boy is busy carrying out Haiban's orders, and it is a shame, but he also needs to leave, and Badri asks where he was going. He replies that the demon's surveillance is getting worse, and at this rate he may no longer be able to protect the kingdom. In any case, he plans to hide it and take refuge in an underground city. The girl says she understands, asking when they will meet again, and the old man falls silent but asks her not to worry. After all, they will not stay there for very long. And then at the same time he hands the girl a kind of amulet. He says that with this pendant she will be able to use barrier magic, and he hoped that she would become an excellent mage. The girl is happy with the gift, and then the old man says that it was a pleasure to meet all her friends. In any case, it is almost time to close the kingdom, so it is better for all of them to leave now. Wishing his apprentice a good journey, she finally leaves, and then the old man stays there alone in the dark. At that very moment, Asher appears there, and the Archmage says that he has already handed over his magic, so his work is already done, mentioning that the captain of the guard should leave as well. And in the end, all humans turn to dust, asking him not to be sad. Hearing that, our boy falls silent, but in his thoughts he asks the Archmage to rest in peace. He finally leaves the castle as well, and Reuben merely watches the situation, saying that it is very tragic. A kingdom that was considered a paradise met an end like this. But then Asher suddenly tells him to shut up. At the same time he attacks Reuben, asking how he still dares to remain there, calling the boy a filthy demon. Huh, so that one is a demon. At that very moment he starts laughing, saying it's no wonder he has been so cold. Either way, he is quite intelligent, calling our boy the one who does not change. Honestly, he is very perceptive, because he completely hid his magic and even disguised himself as that human. The spirit says it could sense absolutely nothing, asking how Asher knew that he thinks he knows that voice, because it is the voice of the demon who toyed with him and caused Krokos' death. Then the demon asks to introduce himself once again, mentioning that he is the supervisor of the demon realm called Bafula. Asher thinks he has heard that name before, and he is a being recorded in the forbidden books in the Empire's underground library. He is described as the god of the demon realm, and Krokos probably should have read those forbidden books as well, and had searched for them to obtain this magic. Raising his sword, the protagonist tells him to get straight to the point, asking why he appeared before him. Who, with a laugh, claims he only came to see what this so-called paradise was like, but it seems it was a failure, and it is sad that someone thought they could build a kingdom with such inferior magic. Besides that sword he had received interests him, and he would certainly be happy if the protagonist handed it over. It has some rather interesting abilities, and perhaps destroying the human kingdom would become much easier with it. Obviously our hero was not going to hand it over so easily, right? And charging at the demon he tries to land a blow, but incredibly enough it has no effect. And Bafula says that he is the god of the demon realm, and things like superhuman strength or mastery of skills mean nothing to him, and honestly killing him would not be a problem. At that very moment, Asher is sent flying, and the demon, summoning a portal, says that is enough playing around for today. But he has to stay sharp because next time he will definitely take that sword. Until then, that is how things will stand. And then the spirit asks if Asher is alright, who, observing the situation, lets out a laugh, thinking that this was a level of power he had never felt before. A short time later, the spirit asks how Asher feels, who asks if he knows anything about Bafula. The spirit says he is a divine being above even the Demon King, and he has also been involved in the creation of the demon realm since the beginning of time. Besides that, he not only watches over the demon realm but also observes all worlds, and Asher says that guy already knew the sword had been given to him, and had also called him the one who does not change, once again asking what that could mean. The spirit says that Bafola probably knows about his past life and is also referring to how for decades he never stopped using his sword and perfecting his skill. Hearing that, Asher thinks he could be the cause behind all of this. He may also be killing the heroes of the past one by one, and it is very likely that he will join forces with the Demon King to destroy the kingdom, which means that defeating him with swordsmanship alone definitely will not be enough, and for that reason he will need overwhelming power. At that very moment, a huge shadow appears, and Asher is surprised that creature is still alive. That is the same bandit from before who absorbed the aberration's power, and the man says that the power of a great god would not be defeated so easily by someone like him. Without wasting time, Asher draws his sword, and then the shadow says that this time it will make sure to defeat him. With just one punch, our boy is sent flying, who thinks he is still tired because of his last fight. The monster says his end has come, declaring that it will take its complete form and become the great god of this world. Our hero was still very tired, and at that very moment, someone asks what kind of god causes a disturbance in her sacred domain. A girl appears at the scene asking who they are. Incredibly enough, the monster answers by saying it is a god, ordering the girl not to interfere, but she questions how a mere aberration dares to act as if it were a god, and why it does not leave right now. At that, the creature becomes furious and charges at the girl, and right then the spirit realizes that woman is dangerous. The girl was just watching the situation, and with complete calm she strikes the creature. It is defeated easily, and the girl says that this is her domain, and within this place her power and authority are absolute. At that very moment, an explosion happens, and the spirit asks who that woman is. Then she approaches our hero, asking if the traveler was alright. She seemed to recognize Asher's soul, who replies that it has been a very long time, calling her the nameless god. Shortly afterward, the girl already realized that the protagonist was the captain of the guard, asking why he was in that form. Meanwhile, a soldier says he heard a loud noise coming from the other side of the forest, asking what happened, and the guy says it seems an explosion was caused by the destruction of something. The priestess was watching everything from afar, wondering if the protagonist was in that place. The commander then orders them to change course and move their forces toward the forest, thinking that it seems the search area to find Asher is shrinking little by little. The scene then shifts to a house, and Asher says that thanks to her he is feeling a little better. The girl says she will bring something for him to eat, and the spirit asks how he knows her, saying that she once held the status of a goddess and is on the same level as the sun god in Marwenia. The spirit is surprised that a god is living in the human world, and Asher says that she is the only god to descend to earth. The nameless goddess was once worshipped as a deity, but she abandoned her divine name and ended up descending to the human world. Because of that, she lost all her abilities and now lives as a human. However, within her own domain, which is this forest, she can wield the absolute power of a god. A little later, the girl says that the protagonist has been through a lot, and not only did he lose the friends from his past, but he is also being attacked by demons. Asher says that is exactly it, mentioning that even after death he cannot escape a life of misery. However, the goddess says that in this twisted world he is one of the most normal ones because his pure soul and high level of achievement bring envy from others. It was exactly for that reason that she recognized his worth and had chosen him. In the past, even though the protagonist did not believe in God, he was wary of that woman, and she felt the same way and wanted to make him her apostle. If he had accepted, he would have gained immense power, but unfortunately, he ended up refusing. Gaining power that way would not be an achievement of his own, and the girl says that is exactly why she wanted him as her apostle. She had seen many people succumb to the temptation of power, but he never hesitated, following only his own path, and honestly, he cannot understand how captivating that is to a god. Asking if he does not want to reconsider and become her apostle in this life, and hearing that, Asher says she definitely has not changed. At that very moment, someone knocks on the door, and man, the commander from earlier was there. The goddess appears at the door to receive them, and the soldier says they are the Solar Knights. To sum it up, they are looking for someone, asking if she knows a man named Asher. The goddess casually says yes, and calling the protagonist, she says he has visitors looking for him, and hearing that, our boy thinks she should have pretended not to know him, right? At that very moment, the commander gives a smile and drawing his sword, says that they have finally met. Right then, the kid thinks, shit, this was going to happen, and at the same time the priestess appears at the scene. Asher only watches everything